from 10 hours to 10 seconds, I wanted to talk about real quick the motivation behind the course and the structure before you hop into it. And I'm going to try not to ramble here, but just thought it would be important to understand the mindset to have going into this course. So by now, I hope that you have gone through Agent Zero and you have a good understanding of the foundational elements. That doesn't mean you have to fully understand like how n8n works yet, or exactly how you plug in certain elements of AI and prompt AI in a workflow. But now you should understand and at least be more familiar with certain terms about workflows versus agents, or thinking about when do I even need AI, or when would I be forcing AI. Thinking about stuff like APIs, understanding that yes, upfront they sound intimidating and it's a little confusing, but it's inevitable that you got to learn how to use APIs, because that's the only way you can get data from n8n to something external. So APIs are super powerful, and we're going to dive into them a little more in this course. But before that, I thought it would be good for you guys to all just have like the foundational elements of what that all looks like first. So that, along with the same thing as like vector databases, and just keep in mind the golden rule of I don't need to know every single little technicality of all the equations that go into this on the back end. But if I can understand it enough to get these automations to run and to work and to be able to iterate on them and improve them, that's what we're going for. So anyways, the motivation here was, we've had a lot of material in this course, and it was kind of two main themes I was seeing, which the first one was actually maybe three. The first one was there's just a lot of material and I don't know where to go, and I don't know where the gaps in my knowledge are. So the first motivation here was to make the learning path more intuitive, where I broke it up into these 6 phases, and hopefully you can follow the order of these phases and they'll kind of just stack on top of each other and compound. The second big thing was, I've got this idea in my head and I know it's feasible with n8n, or at least I hope it is, but I don't know how to transform that into a workflow and into an actual automation that's practical. Kind of why I wanted to, before we get into n8n at all, to start to talk about identifying opportunities for automation and how you actually map them out in the right way so that you can get started and you can start building in the right foundational, modular, scalable way. And the third one was just kind of the motivation for Agent Zero, which was sometimes people were truly at the very beginning of, I had just kind of heard about AI and I wanted to get into it, and just not knowing where to start and feeling overwhelmed with not even understanding some of the basics first. So the foundations are important, and even if you are not a complete beginner, I still think that Agent Zero would be good to at least skim through certain topics. But anyways, that is sort of like the way that I broke up this course. Please let me know any feedback that you guys have on the way through. Let me know as you're going through if there's any gaps or anything that you think is not super clear. The goal here is for me to keep iterating on this course, adding in some modules where they make sense, and just making this learning path a really effective place to learn how to build and sell these solutions. So yeah, I'm excited about this. Let me know your guys' thoughts, and I'll see you in the course. Thanks, guys. Okay, welcome to From 10 Hours. All right, so the 4 pillars of automation worthy processes. The reason I wanted to talk about this is because whether your goal is to start an AI agency and help clients understand how to automate certain processes, or your goal is you own a business and you want to start to automate your own processes, you could get burned if you start at the wrong spot. And just to zoom out real quick, what I mean by that is, in my experience, clients will come and say, hey, AI looks great. I need to start using AI. I've seen how much stuff about like it's going to help our productivity. We don't know where to start. So my thought process is basically like if you start in the wrong place, you may not see that ROI quickly or even at all, and then you're going to be like, this is dumb. Why did I even waste my time here? So if you can start somewhere where you're going to get a quick win and see some immediate ROI, that is the best case scenario for both you, your business, or you and your client. So anyways, the 4 pillars. Repetitive. If you're doing the same task over and over, especially on a daily or weekly basis, it's likely a strong candidate for automation. These are usually tasks with consistent inputs and outputs, meaning you know what you're going to put into this automation and you know exactly what you want to get out. So like when you have a Zoom meeting, you know that if you could take the transcript, give it to ChatGPT and say, hey, spit out action items, and then it would give you action items, and then you'd send those action items to everyone on the Zoom meeting. That's consistent input and output. Also, is the process time consuming? So if it eats up a significant chunk of you or your team's time, even if done infrequently, that can obviously be huge leverage and ROI if it is automated. Error prone. Processes that involve manual data entry, multiple handoffs, or conditional logic where humans tend to make mistakes are ideal for automation because machines don't get fatigued, they don't get distracted, they don't have any emotional buy-in. They are just going to follow the rules and the systems that you put in place for them. And then scalable, look for processes where the workload increases as your business grows. Automating these ensures you can scale without adding headcount. So what do I mean by that? Clients will ask us, hey, I want a personal assistant. I saw your Ultimate Assistant video. It was sick. I'm like, oh, thank you. I appreciate that. But I don't think we should start there. And why we shouldn't potentially start there is because that isn't like the ROI there isn't scalable in the sense of, let's say you have 50 customers. You've got a personal assistant and you have 50 customers. When your business goes from 50 to 500 customers, are you going to be using your personal assistant 10 times more? Likely not. I guess there's an argument, oh, well, I'll have more meetings, I'll have more, maybe, but probably not 10 times in the same way that if you say, hey, let me build you an onboarding flow. Someone submits a form on your website, I'll research them, or I'll build you a system that researches them, gives you a sales brief, and then does an initial reach out to them and has them book in a call. If you have 50 form submissions a week, your business grows to 500 form submissions a week, that automation is scaling the ROI as the business grows. And that is like where the true value comes in because not only does it stack on top of each other and say, hey, I'm saving you an hour a week, it scales up to I'm saving you an hour a week over the course of a year, which is 52 hours a year. But not only that, but it's going to compound because as I start to save you more time, you're going to grow more and more. And anyways, sorry, I just love talking about this kind of stuff. And there's a section here later about like ROI. So I'll dive more into that later. Don't want to get carried away, but that's like my thought process there, right? So bonus rule of thumb, if you've done it 3 times and it follows a clear pattern and it's starting to feel boring, it's probably ready to be automated. And in automation, when we're identifying low-hanging fruits and looking for opportunities, boring is beautiful. And what do I mean by that is that predictable tasks are the easiest to automate because the guardrails can be set in place. There aren't as many edge cases. We know the input, we know the rules, and we know the output. There's no guesswork. It's just clean, reliable automation. A lot of these can be classic rule-based, if this, then that, where we define the trigger, the action, and this is obviously great for simple logic, clear steps, and repetitive administrative work. But AI really changed the game here, and that's why there's this gold rush, there's this golden opportunity, this blue ocean, is because now, rather than just that if this, then that, we can set up these systems where messy or unstructured inputs can be handled and there's more flexible outputs. Because we can use something like LLM, like an LLM like ChatGPT, inside of the workflow to help us use reasoning, decision making, and generate some sort of response. AI helps where rules break down or flexibility is needed, any aspect of autonomy or unpredictability. But still, starting with boring is the best way to start. And really, like, if you're a complete beginner to end-to-end and you start trying to build an agent, that's probably not the right place to start. And it's easy to start there because there's tutorials there and that's where all the hype is. But where you want to start is probably just workflows. And then from workflows to AI workflows. And from AI workflows to AI agents, that's the natural evolution that not only I took, but society has taken in the way that ChatGPT evolved to tool calling ChatGPT, which is evolving to autonomous agentic systems. So like that's the natural progression. So it'd be like learning how to run before you learn how to walk. So anyways, pick the low-hanging fruit, look for repetitive, time-consuming tasks that you've done 3+ times, clear patterns, high annoyance, low complexity, automate those first, build momentum, and then start to layer in AI. Don't force AI in a process where it doesn't exist. When I'm talking to clients, the first thing I usually ask is like, tell me about your day. Like, what is something that you do every day? Or tell me about your marketing team. What do they do every single day? And just kind of start there and look for those patterns. Anyways, see you guys in the next one. So finding automation opportunities, building off of those four pillars. Let's say maybe you're not working with clients and you're trying to look inside your own day to day for where you can start to do some automations. But obviously, this is kind of like a nice little checklist of questions to ask clients as well if that's your goal. But you can look before you start to look into certain verticals, you can look at your own tech stack because these are some really quick wins where you can set up an automation that takes a day and already start to feel that impact. So these are some areas where automation opportunities can hide. Your inbox. Are you answering the same kinds of emails repetitively? Do you keep replying with the same information? This goes back to within your organization having some sort of central place, a central source of truth. So I've talked about before in the workplace, 50% of time, roughly, is wasted on work about work, meaning, hey, Jim, where did you leave that, where did you leave that document for our client? And then you're wasting your own time trying to find it, but also you're wasting Jim's time. So this kind of stuff, like having a central source of truth, maybe that's not even on an automation. Maybe that's just like an SOP of like, hey, this is where everything lives. But anyways, some sort of automation where if you're getting this type of email, you're going to respond with this type of information every time, and that's just like boom, that's all you need. Your calendar. Do you have recurring meetings? Do you prep the same way before every meeting? Do you follow up in the same way after every meeting? With your to-do list or project management, are there similar tasks reappearing again and again? Do you repeat the same steps for different clients or projects? Whether that's, like creating sales briefs, or whether that's your follow-ups, or whether that's your kickoff call documents, whatever that may look like, are there areas for automation there? In your Slack or in your messaging apps, are you sharing the same links or files? Do you often remind people about the same things? Once again, maybe that's more of like a training, company culture. Everything is stored in a central location. Go look there. Don't waste my time with that. But still potentially some automation opportunities there. Dashboards or Google Sheets, are you manually pulling the same data repeatedly? Are you organizing or formatting it in the same way every time? If so, like that was the bulk of my job at Goldman was, hey, every day pull this report, format it nice, create graphics, and send it as an email to the whole team. So that was like a lot of the stuff I did was I made automated reports where I would just pull data from different sources, standardize it, clean it, create those little charts and send it off in an email. And it would be like hey, this is the daily end of the day report, that sort of thing. Anyways, file storage, CRM or customer platforms, right? There's just opportunities everywhere. And the good news is a lot of these platforms will already have automations baked in. So you can use AI in them, or you have those systems in them where you can sort of like bake in some of this functionality and you don't have to build out a full automation. But this will get you in the automation mindset of like, oh, like all I need some sort of event to happen that's going to trigger something else to happen. And if I can set up those steps, I can save so much time. And maybe it's not even a trigger of an event. Maybe it's just like every day at noon or whatever. I don't know. So if that approach isn't working for you, start to shift your focus to specific tools or to broader business functions or verticals inside your organization. So for example, in the sales vertical, what is the leads journey from initial contact, whether that means the first time they ever find out about your business and they join your website they go to your website and they fill out a form, that initial touch point until they become a client. What is that journey? What are those steps? And then once they become a client, so there's more than that, right? So it's like once they become a prospect, and then how do you get them to a client? That's what I meant to say, I think. But anyways, what do you do during outreach, qualification, follow-up, or handoff? Customer support. What happens when a customer actually supports a ticket or reaches out for help? How is the request tracked, resolved, status, closed? What does it look like? Exactly. So if you know the steps, sorry, I didn't, that wasn't a sentence. I don't know what I just said. But if you know the steps and they happen in that predictable nature, that's a great opportunity for automation. And another one that scales as the business scales. Finance or billing. How are invoices created, sent, and tracked? Is there a monthly routine around payments, receipts, or expense categories? Marketing. Are there content repurposing flows, scheduled routines, or lead magnet delivery systems or steps that happen again and again in the same order? So start at the beginning of the process. What is the trigger? And then what are the steps until you get to that end result? And that is how you can sort of like map out the automation you want to build. There's some other questions you can ask yourself or your clients, which would be, what are you tired of doing? What could someone else be doing for you from start to finish if you gave them the instructions? What do you wish could happen while you slept? Where do you make the same decisions repeatedly? And what tasks do you always procrastinate on? Because typically those are the monotonous, repetitive, boring ones. And those can maybe help like surface some of the things that you're overlooking as far as like, oh, that's a great automation opportunity, but they could be hiding in plain sight. So here's just a few examples. I'm not going to read through all of these, but like, let's just say summarizing emails. If you receive many emails, an AI agent can fetch your emails daily, summarize key points, and send you a brief digest. This saves you from reading every message in full, for instance, and it then provides an email summarizing agent workflow that fetches emails, summarizes them, and sends concise updates morning and evening, and you don't have that overload. Maybe that sounds like something that's great to you. Maybe for you, that's just like you would never want to do that because you're going to miss something, you don't trust it. Maybe you'd rather just get like an executive assistant to help you with your inbox filtering. But anyways, like that's just an example, right? And here are some other examples if you want to pause and read through those. But you want to start with something manageable. And like I said earlier, you don't want to get burnt on your first experience with an automation or delivering something to a client. The best beginner projects often involve text. That's why I don't do too much with voice yet, just because you would really need to understand, how do I build a text-based AI agent with tool calling in order to build an efficient voice agent. But before you understand the text-based AI agent, you should understand AI workflows. And before you understand AI workflows, you should really understand workflows. So that's like the progression in my mind. And then down here, I just wanted to list like 10 examples to spark some ideas. I don't need to read all these off, but like auto sending a welcome email, adding new Facebook leads to your CRM, just like syncing data, tagging a new Stripe customer in your CRM, converting a Notion doc to a PDF, auto posting new YouTube videos as well to LinkedIn, whatever it may be. There are just so many opportunities that are very customized to your business, the way you do business, or the business of the clients you're trying to provide these services to. So in this space right now, a lot of it is about identifying things rather than just knowing how to turn it in. Like people ask me a ton, I have an idea for an automation. How do I get that onto a canvas and actually get it to run and get it to work? But before that, there's a lot of people that may struggle with like what's the best opportunity to start with, or what process is going to have the highest ROI. And so it's important to understand like these concepts and think through what to look for. So see you guys in the next one. Okay. So now we finally get to talk about the ROI of automation systems. And there's a lot in this doc, so I'm not going to read off every line. But the idea here is that by the end of this video, you'll be able to way better not only identify processes that are high ROI, but also be able to communicate the true value of these systems. Because the business that we're in right now, it can be tough to communicate the actual ROI. And there's a couple reasons for that. The first one I'm thinking of is because we are basically selling productivity tools or things that happen in the back end. And when things happen in the back end, you may not notice it as much. And a lot of times people perceive value as, how much am I using this thing? So you have a subscription to whatever service. If you only use it once a month, you're going to be like, maybe not super valuable to me. And so if you have an automation setup where you're not physically triggering it or interacting with it, it may not seem super valuable, even though on the back end it's saving hours and hours of time, but maybe you just don't see that up front. And with that is the whole aspect of, most people are thinking in terms of money, not time. Meaning, if I'm going to pay this team $6,000 for this project, how much money am I going to get back from that? And the answer is, it's hard to tell, because it's not like something like SMMA where I'm going to spend $5,000, or SMMA, but like you're an SMMA and you're offering your services to a client. So you're a social media marketing agency and you say, hey, you pay me $5,000 and you are going to increase your revenue this month by $30,000 because of the ads I'm running and the campaigns, whatever it is. That's very clear. It's like, oh, okay, I'm getting $25,000. That's a great investment. Why would I not do that? Now, if we're able to save, we're in the business of saving time, which in turn directly increases revenue, or it should, because it's supposed to free up people's time on the monotonous, repetitive, boring stuff that's low impact so that they can focus on higher impact stuff. And the thing here is like, it's not as one-to-one because they're thinking of the cost of the system. So ROI is obviously just a financial metric that measures the profitability of an investment relative to its cost. In the context of automation, ROI quantifies the financial benefits generated by your automation solution compared to the cost of implementing it. So the basic formula here is ROI is net return divided by the cost of investment times 100. And this formula helps determine whether the time, effort, and resources invested in building an automated solution will generate sufficient value to justify the investment. And so maybe like you can do all these calculations, right? But it's like, with productivity tools, let's say we're saving someone an hour a day. Now they are using this new thing and it's saving them an hour a day. And even though right in that moment it may not feel like, oh wow, this is awesome, but they get back an hour a day. And so they use this for a month, and then a week or a month later, if you turned off the system, they would hate it because they would feel, now I've gotten used to this, and now I have an extra hour of work on top of my already busy day. And so the goal is obviously to chip away, and save time. And with these productivity tools, if they were taken away, you would then feel very upset and you would notice that. So like ChatGPT, we all probably at this point are using it a ton, and it's helping us be so much more productive that we don't even notice. But now if someone was to turn off ChatGPT or any of these LLMs, we no longer could use them to help us with anything: ideation, writing emails, drafting things. We would once again understand how long it took us before we had these systems in place. And so, like, a perfect example is I use this thing with my mic called Whisperflow, where I can, whenever I'm like in a text box, or whenever I have like this, whenever I have this little thing, that means I'm typing. So like, watch this. Like, the ROI for automation systems is absurd. And I no longer type, like, at all. Even if I'm just saying thanks, I've become so used to this thing where I no longer type. So if I ever DM you or anything and there's like, your name is misspelled or something's misspelled, it's because I did that. Sorry. But then I go, I travel and I take my laptop and I don't have Whisperflow installed, and I realize I'm typing everything and I feel so slow and it's just horrible. So that's like, you know, that's kind of the analogy I'm trying to make. Hopefully that was helpful. Maybe not. Anyway, so there's tangible versus intangible benefits. And so the tangible ones are measurable, and they're going to be not as direct as, like an SMMA offer, but they're measurable. So that is, how much time are we going to save you? How much money are we going to save you because this time is being saved? So whether that's in the form of different subscriptions you're using, or how much you used to pay an hourly employee to do that job, whatever it is, and then improved compliance. But you can't ignore the intangible benefits, even though maybe that's not where you want to start by saying, okay, this is the value prop of what I'm offering you. But in the long term, these are other intangible benefits like employee satisfaction, customer engagement, better decision making. So when it comes to identifying high ROI processes, it kind of goes back to those 4 pillars we had touched on, but just to sort of reiterate: repetitive and rule-based, high volume, time intensive, error prone, and cross system. So when you're thinking about, I don't know, the place that you're in right now, whether that's, I'm trying to automate stuff for my business and my team. I need to convince my team that, like, this is a great investment, a great use of our time. I need to convince this client to pay me to build a system for them. Here are some things that you should ask yourself or your client. You should ask the stakeholders this, and we always ask our clients this. So we're looking at a process. What is the frequency of this process? Every day, multiple times a day, once a month? What is that? What is the time for execution? And by that, I mean the manual time that you or your team spends doing that right now. How many people are involved in this process? And what is the hourly cost of their labor? And then what's the current error rate? And what does it cost you if you have an error? Because then you're able to say, okay, so you said this takes, you do this every day. It takes 20 minutes a day. You have 4 people involved in this process, and they each, you pay them each $50 an hour. And every time we get an error, which happens twice a month, it costs us $100. You're able to use those numbers to say, okay, well, our system is going to cut down that time to 2 minutes. It's going to happen every day, but you won't have to be doing it every day. There's going to be 0 people involved. It's going to error, I don't know, however it's going to error, but if it does error, we have this error fallback so that it comes to you, human in the loop notification. So essentially there's no errors unless it's your fault. Anyways, that's how you can use those statistics to show some value. Quantifying time savings and revenue impact. So when it comes to calculating time savings, think about how long does the current process take manually? So let's say it takes an hour. And then you estimate how long it will take if you automate it. So let's say that's 35 minutes. An automation that takes 35 minutes is a pretty long automation. But either way, then we're saving 25 minutes. And so if we're calculating the time difference, which is, manual minus automated, which would be 25 minutes saved, we multiply that by how often the process runs, so 20 times a week. That would be, we're saving 500 minutes, which is 8.33 hours. So converting that to revenue is, when humans spend less time on routine tasks, their labor costs decrease, and they can also spend their time doing higher impact things. And for revenue generation, time saved can be redirected to revenue generating activities. So explicitly having on more sales calls, or pumping out more marketing materials, or creating more content, whatever it is. And labor costs also include benefits and paid leave and insurance, whatever it is, which apparently is about 43% above the actual base wage that people are given as like their salary. So key factors that impact ROI here: process complexity and volume. High volume processes and complex processes are obviously a super, super high ROI in the long term. That's probably not the first automation you should build or the best place to initially start, but in general, like, high volume and complex processes are very high ROI. The initial investment. So if it's more upfront cost, it's usually a longer timeline to see that ROI, because, I just spent $50,000 on this. When am I going to start to actually feel and see these impacts? The good news is about N8N is you typically won't have too much of an upfront cost, because it's no code. It's not too expensive to set up, especially if you self-host it. And traditionally, it would have taken a team of software engineers to do things that now one end-to-end no coder can do in a few days. You also have the operation schedule. So research shows that a one shift operation running 5 days a week might achieve ROI in 3.1 years compared to just zero point 0.7 years for a 24/7 operation. So in other words, 24/7 operations is a faster ROI than a one shift setup. And a one shift setup means like, if you work 9 to 5, 5 days a week, that's one shift, 5 days a week. But if you have a 24/7 operation, it's an automation that is never sleeping and it's just running, running, running all the time. Way quicker ROI. That's about a fourth of the time, a little less actually. But yeah. So then, of course, you have the labor costs, true labor costs, which are base wages, plus benefits and insurance, plus taxes and compliance, plus training costs, plus management overhead. And these additional factors can increase the cost of an employee by 25 to 50% their actual base salary. So 5 comprehensive metrics for automation ROI. We've talked a lot about this, but basically cost savings, productivity gains, revenue growth, efficiency improvements, and compliance and risk management. And the actual ROI process is you define your objectives and your KPIs. So what process are you automating? What are you expecting? What are the things you're going to track? So like what actual key performance indicators can we track? Whether that is, some sort of efficiency metric or our click-through rate or whatever it is, whatever you're tracking, gather that baseline data so you can see if there's actually improvement or not. Manual time spent, error rates, resources used, current throughput, and then you're going to implement the system and you're going to track those KPIs because then you can actually see in the data never lies, if the system's helping or not. And then when you're calculating the ROI, you want to do it over short term and continue to track it so that you can see, okay, short term versus medium term versus long term, because what it should do is it should go exponential. It should not be a linear ROI. It should be exponential if you chose the right processes and the systems are working the way they should. And of course, the business has to be growing for that kind of stuff to actually be exponential. So real world ROI, here's a link where there's some examples of the ROI of AI powered automation. And that's where I got these 3. And then a case study down here, which I think this was literally just on ROI or on automation, which is about how quickly will I get my money back if I spend $1 million on automation. So I'm not going to read these out, but those are some pretty impressive statistics when it comes to AI automation, especially with how new this stuff is. But this was pretty cool. So an automation robot that enabled scaling from 2 to 3 shifts, and it reduced staffing needs from 35 people to 2 per shift, which is obviously huge. So how end-to-end enhances automation ROI? It's low code development, which is faster and cheaper, flexible workflows, which are easy to adapt and change, scalable architecture, it can grow without major cost increases, and then you have the option to self-host for lower recurring cost and more control. And just to choose your first ROI automation, start small and meaningful, prioritize frequency, include all ROI factors, track before and after metrics, and you want to think long-term. And here's just like one of those matrices. This is a impact complexity one. The best place to start would be a high impact and a low complexity, which would be right here. You've got these other areas you can look at, but this is the pretty much like the golden square you want to look at. And actually, I had ChatGPT generate this image, so just a fun fact. But anyways, hopefully by now you can understand like how you can start to communicate this stuff to the stakeholders and the decision makers and show them how much value is here. So thanks for listening. All right, intro to process mapping. Process mapping for AI automations is super important. And it's the whole process of like documenting the steps so that, I'm sure you've heard me talking about wireframing, which is something that I like to do before I get into building an automation. But process mapping is like just that all wrapped up into one, which is basically just being very, very clear about the exact steps that you're going to take so that when you're actually in N8N, make, whatever it is, whenever you're in the builder, you can basically just be looking at a guide like we have right here, and you know exactly what to plug in and what goes where and why. If you were trying to build this Lego parrot or a puzzle or whatever it was, and you had all the pieces, and you knew what the end goal is supposed to look like, but you don't have the instructions there, or I guess with a puzzle, maybe it's like you don't know, like you don't have the front box that shows you the picture. You could build it and you could get there, but it's just going to take a lot longer than if you already mapped out the entire process and you had a set of instructions like a wireframe. So it's essentially just creating that fundamental or foundational blueprint for building these AI automations. Because if you can map out all the steps, and first of all, when you map out all the steps, you're probably going to see a lot of the complexities that you hadn't thought of yet. And then you can build those in. So then when you're actually in your workflow, what you want to avoid is you get near the end and then you have to restart because you didn't build it right and it's not scalable or reusable or modular. because you didn't map it out. And that's happened to me multiple times in my first couple of projects. I got near the end and I realized that I should have been breaking this down into sub workflows, and it just was a mess. So, anyways, that's why it matters. We're going to talk more about it, but what it is, is listing out every step, even if it's a really small step, just listing out everything in the order that it happens. And so this gives us a visualization of the steps, the decisions, the flows, the interactions, the dependencies between, different entities. And this is going to, basically this is going to make really clear to us a few things. The first one being, where do we need AI? The second one being, is this a workflow or is this an AI agent? Because do we know how the flow works every time? Or are there going to be things that are a bit unpredictable and non-deterministic in the sense that we don't know what the tool calling will look like, and then we know, okay, well, we probably need an agent for this process. And then the third one is, what's the tech stack? Because at that point we'll understand what data do we need. Okay, if we need this customer's email, we'll have to go look that up. So we'll need to hit our CRM or our contact database. And if we need to, create this sort of brief, what type of internal policies do we need for that? Okay, well, we're going to have to integrate with our Dropbox or with our Notion in order to get that data. And so this is going to make it very clear what integrations we need as well. And so the whole theory here, actually, this is very well timed because last night I was reading an article and it pops up right here, Kydland's Law, which is if you write the problem down clearly, then the matter is half solved. And so a lot of your time should be spent identifying the process, mapping it all out, having all the steps there, potentially creating a wireframe. I would recommend to create a wireframe. And then from there, you get into end-to-end. You've got one screen right here where you're looking at your wireframe and your process map, and you've got one screen right here where you're looking at the actual end-to-end workflow, and you're just building, and you're just plugging things in. Especially if you're trying to communicate this to a potential client or to your team, you can show that value there because that proves your expertise in the sense of this person really knows how to build a system. They just showed me how they would build it, but they haven't done it yet because that would be you don't want to build that for free. But you can show them that. And not only is that going to prove value, but that's also going to be a really good opportunity to align with them on what the requirements of this project looks like. I can't tell you how many times we've shown someone a wireframe, and because it's a wireframe, because it's visual and it actually makes sense to them, it's basically a flow chart. Because it makes sense to them, rather than looking at an end-to-end workflow, they're able to communicate, oh, okay, this is not what we want that to do there. So that step 4 right there, we don't need to do that at all. And that helps you guys align as well, because now you're both visually looking at a process rather than just speaking about a process with your voices. So there's that value, but then there's also the value of, let's say you're giving this product to a developer. If you can give them a wireframe of me and the client aligned on this wireframe, here it is, then it's there. Then the developer's also aligned on that vision, and there's no room for the confusion there. So anyways, it's really critical for AI automations because it's going to give us clarity and visibility, which means that we can see a clear visual overview of the full process, even if it's it's not going to be technical because it's basically just a flow chart. There's going to be boxes and there's going to be arrows and it's very intuitive. You just follow the arrow. Bottleneck identification. So when I talked about earlier is you'll build this out and then you'll realize some of the complexities in the system that you may not have thought of if you were building it out in end-to-end step by step. So it'll show us inefficiencies, redundancies, and blockers, and then you're able to sort of think about those guardrails that you can build before you even have to run into that issue. Error reduction. So kind of same thing here. It helps avoid missing critical steps. Resource optimization. It supports better distribution of automated versus human tasks because you understand what types of decisions need to be made, and based on those decisions, what's the logic that follows that decision. Scalability planning. It's going to make it easier to scale these automations with well-structured processes because you're going to be building these things out with the idea that this is a foundation and we're going to build on top of these later. And then you have efficiency because it's going to cut down time spent actually hands-on keyboard developing these systems. So a practical example of process mapping would be customer support emails. And this is actually what we have down here, right? So a new email is received. That is shown with this Gmail trigger. So every time a new email comes in, the Gmail trigger fires off. From there, we're determining if the email is customer support related, right here. This text classifier is using an AI node. So this is the AI chat model, which is a large language model. And we are using this AI to read the email and understand customer support. If yes, go this way. If no, go this way. So if yes, it's going to come to this agent and it's going to look up information needed to answer the request. So it's going to go to the Pinecone vector store to look up that information. If needed, ask someone internally for missing info. And then what you're going to do is draft a helpful response. Obviously, this agent doesn't have that human in the loop functionality. We could easily work that in. But if needed, ask someone internally for missing info, and then you're going to draft a helpful response, which is right here. We're labeling the email, we're drafting the response, and we're sending it off. And then, so this is a little bit out of order down here. But either way, that's the steps of this workflow, and that's exactly how we see this happen. So A workflow is a complete automation sequence made of nodes. So from here all the way to here, that is a workflow, and it's made up of steps in between. The node, which is an individual step, can be a trigger, can be sending an email, labeling an email, classifying. A node is each action, and that would be basically like each step in the workflow would be a node. Connections are basically just between step 1 and 2, between step 3 and 4. We're just connecting up these things, and that's how you follow the flow all the way down to the end of the workflow. And the general pattern is basically there's a trigger, there's some data processing, there's tool interactions, and then we get the final output. So email received, we process the data, we take action, and then we get the final email. When you're mapping data, some things to consider would be the input data structure, meaning what's coming in and its format. So because we know we're getting an email, we're able to say, okay, text classifier, you're going to be reading an email, and here's what you do with it. So we identify that, we identify how it's modified, and then what you output. So basically it just outputs the data down one of these paths based on the system prompt that we gave this text classifier and said, hey, you're going to get an email, and you're going to determine if it's customer support or not. Customer support emails typically look like this, and we give it an example, or we say these are keywords that may be found in a customer support email, and it will use its brain to figure it out. That's a decision point. So we give it the decision criteria, and that is how it determines the branching. We decide what happens on each route, so it either goes up to customer support or goes down to other. And if we need to, we can merge those branches back together. In this flow, we're not, but we can. Okay, so a practical example, content approval workflow. The trigger is when someone uploads a new document to Google Drive. We would capture that data. It could be a webhook, it could be whatever, but we're going to capture that data. That's the trigger. That starts the workflow. Then we're going to extract metadata and content from that new document. That's data processing. Then we have a decision point, which is the document a blog or a white paper? If it's a blog post, we're going to route to a marketing manager. If it's a white paper, we're going to route to a technical lead. Then we have an external integration, which means we're sending the Slack notification with a document link. We're going to wait for approval from the human. And then we're reaching another decision point, which is if approved, move to the folder and notify the team. If it's rejected, move to a different folder and notify the author. And then the output is that we update the content tracking spreadsheet with a new status. So here is just basically a wireframe, a flow chart of this process. So new document uploaded, extracting the data, decision point, what type of document? If it's a blog post, we're going to route it to the marketing manager. If it's a wallpaper, we're going to route it to a technical lead. But then the paths kind of come back. So then both of these are going to send a Slack notification and wait for approval. Then we have another decision point, which is the content approved? If yes, publication folder, notify team, and then update the sheet. If no, move to revision folder, notify author, update the sheet. So hopefully that kind of paints a picture as like this is kind of a process map. This is a general wireframe of a flow chart of the process. And this is what I could say, hey, this is what we're thinking. Does this align with your vision of this workflow? If yes, we're good. Otherwise, we have to make some changes and iterations here. And then we know we're aligned after sort of like reviewing this document process map. Or not document, just process map. Anyways, moving on to the next one. Workflow triggers is very important to understand because any automation, regardless of n8n or Make or Zapier or Lindy or Lizer or MindStudio or whatever you end up deciding to use. Obviously, this community is primarily right now focused on n8n. Who knows what we'll be doing in 6 months here, but what I do know for a fact is that in order to automate things, we need triggers. And that is basically just the first step. What triggers the workflow? So in the case of n8n, this is what it looks like when you open a blank workflow. And there's a big button right here that says add first step. When you click on that, it's going to pop up on the right hand side and say what triggers this workflow. And these are the different types that we have. Obviously, there's way more than just these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, because these expand. And then it's basically like almost every single integration has a trigger, meaning Gmail has a trigger, Discord has a trigger, Slack, Telegram, WhatsApp, HubSpot, Airtable, Sheets. Every integration has some sort of trigger. And what's going on behind the scenes of a trigger is it's basically just a webhook. We don't have to dive into that because that may be confusing, but we choose a trigger, right? So a webhook. This fires when external systems send data to a unique URL. And this is good for real-time automation. So just to make it as simple as possible, let's say we have a form submission on our website, and when the user clicks submit, that fires off data to a webhook. And so every time a user submits a form, your workflow would trigger if you set up this webhook right, and then the rest of the nodes that you set up would fire off. You can also have a scheduled trigger, meaning every day I want this to run at 6 a.m. and then at 6 p.m. if you want to send out a morning briefing and a morning briefing and a end of day report. That's how you can set up a scheduled trigger. You can also do an end-to-end workflow trigger, meaning I'm going to build out this one workflow that is going to fire off whenever I need to send an email. So I have my email workflow right here. But what I can do is I can build a different workflow to trigger this email workflow. So that's how, when I talk about modularity and scalability, is you can build out these little tools and building blocks as workflows, and you can have other workflows trigger them, which is really cool to think about. Like common functions that you do or common functions in a workflow, just build it out, keep it built out as a tool, and then have other workflows call on them and trigger them. So that's what like an end-to-end trigger would look like. And then of course you have all of your external triggers, which is like every time I get a new email, every time someone submits a ticket in my CRM, every time someone shoots a message to my WhatsApp. Like those are the other types of external service triggers you could have. And what I was saying is that this is basically just a webhook, but that's just like wrapped up all pretty for us. Anyways. And then we have manual triggers, which is usually just for sort of like testing, or if you have an on-demand operation, like whenever I'm building a workflow, I'm usually going to test it with a manual trigger, just so I can, at the bottom, I can hit test step and it will just run. So I can just like, see if things are working. And what I meant by like an on-demand operation is like, let's say you have a workflow that's going to take an Excel sheet and it's going to extract the data and it's going to parse it and it's going to create some visualizations. And that's really just like it's an automation that saves you time, but it's not some sort of schedule. So whenever you need to, you can just take that Excel sheet, put it into this workflow, and then hit run yourself, and then you'll get spit out something, which at the end of the day is still going to save you time because you built out that process, but it's a manual trigger. So anyways, selecting the right trigger. It's just really important to understand, like when you have a process, when you've mapped out your process and you've mapped out the way you do it manually, there's always something that triggers you to do this process. Whether that just means I get triggered once a day to do this, or it's I do this every time I receive an email from X person, or every time I receive an email about X event. So like identify the trigger. What is the source? Where is it coming from? What is the timing of that trigger? What data is available when you get that, when you trigger this event, what data is available, because that helps you figure out what data do I need to go get. And then reliability, how important is fail-proof execution. Then we have mapping that trigger configuration. So when you're planning your trigger, document what login or API keys or credentials are needed, what settings need to be defined, expected data format, what does the incoming data look like, and then error handling, what if the trigger doesn't fire, what happens? So a practical example here is we have basically the same process, but it can be triggered in 3 different ways. So option A, with a webhook. So the use case here is a ticket system supports webhook notification. To configure this, we need a webhook URL from n8n, and we need to somehow embed that into our ticketing system so that we can link the 2 things to send over data to the webhook. The data format here would be JSON, where we'd be sending over in JSON format a ticket ID, customer info, description, timestamp, email, whatever it is. We can send over the data in JSON. The pros of this method is that we have instant processing with clean structured data. The cons are that we require webhook support from the ticket system. So if the ticket system doesn't natively let us send off data to a webhook, we can't use this trigger. So let's say we can't use a webhook. Option B, we could use a schedule. So we have API access, but we don't have webhook functionality. To configure this, we need to set up an interval of when we want this thing to run. And we also need API credentials to access our ticketing system. The data format is going to be querying for new tickets since the last run. So this can get messy because how many do we pull back? And how many do we know, or how do we know which tickets have already been processed if this is running on a schedule rather than on an event trigger? The pros is that it works with any API-based system. The cons is that there's delay between ticket creation and workflow run. So another con there is, like besides the fact that we have to track which ones have been processed or not, we also have the element of like, are we going to run this every hour? Are we going to run this once a day, twice a day? Is there going to be a big gap between a ticket being submitted and the person receiving a response? And then the other option we have is like an email trigger. And there's probably even more than just these 3, but the third option we have is an email trigger. Tickets can arrive via email as well as the ticketing system. What we would need to do to configure this ticket or to configure this email trigger is we need an email login, and we also need parsing rules, meaning we need to understand what type of data is coming through in the email and how we're going to parse it to actually be able to use it. So data format, email body, and attachments, what does that look like? The pros here is that it's easy to set up for a basic workflow. The cons are that it's way less structured data, requires parsing, and there's a lot of variability there with how many attachments could be sent through, something like that. So hopefully this gives you a good picture of like what triggers are, why they're important to understand, and not just like the trigger, but also like the type of data that trigger will send you. Because Like I said before, a workflow is just moving data from left to right, and we really have to understand what it looks like and how we need it in order to actually have an efficient workflow. So that's triggers. So I've been hammering home data, data, data. An effective process mapping requires clear identification of where data comes from and where it needs to go. Like I said, we're just moving data from node to node, and that is what a workflow is. So identifying data sources, it can enter our end-to-end workflows from multiple places. It can be a user input in the form of a form submission, a chat interaction, or manual entries. It can be a system event, meaning a notification from some sort of application that we've integrated into our workflow. It can be a database. It can be records retrieved from existing data stores or a vector database or a SQL database that you have, whatever it is. Files, content from documents, spreadsheets, media files, or APIs where we're pulling it from some sort of external service. So once we understand the data sources, we also need to understand the data structure. So for each source, the process map should document what is the format. Does this come to me in JSON or CSV or binary? Especially if it's binary. You guys will see there's a lot of stuff that happens with binary that you need to kind of change the logic a little bit more if it is binary. Required fields, specific data elements needed, optional fields, additional data that may be available. I had this as italicized because it's like not always, but there are some use cases where you do need to understand some things are required, some things are not. Data types, you need to understand if they're text, numbers, dates, or Boolean values. And we've talked about these data types before. And then we have to have volume considerations, meaning how much data is going to come through, what's that size like, and the frequency of how often data is going to be flowing through the system. From there, we talk about, we understand the sources, we understand what it's going to look like. Now we have to talk about how does it transform. So the way that the data changes through the workflow could look like field extraction, meaning we're going to get back a ton of JSON from a file, but we only want like the invoice number and the amount. So we're going to extract that data out. Or maybe we're converting it. So we're changing it from binary to JSON, which we do a lot to actually be able to work with it. Or maybe we are enriching it. So we're adding more information in. So like we're pulling in a customer's record. We're getting that in JSON. We're going to use a sales call transcript to enrich it. And then we're going to upsert it back into the CRM on that customer's record. And like there's going to be more information now in other fields. Calculations, maybe we need to do operations and perform some sort of analysis, or aggregation where we're combining multiple data items together and then spitting them out somewhere else. And that's when we need to identify the destinations. So sometimes we process data just in the back end and it goes into something else. Sometimes we're processing data and we're sending off an email. What does that look like? Is it going to be stored somewhere? Are we pushing it into external systems? Are we sending notifications? Or are we doing some sort of dashboard, report, visualization, anything like that? What are we doing with the data? So those are like the 4 main steps, right? So a practical example here is lead enrichment. So the data source, this is going to come in through the form of a form response. This comes in as a JSON payload through a webhook. So it's coming through as JSON and we're getting it from a form submission. We have key fields like name, email, company, phone number, interest area, and that is the trigger. Then we're going to transform it. So we're going to standardize all this. We're going to convert the name to first and last name components. We're going to format the phone number to a standardized way so we can always work with it consistently. And we're going to convert the interest area to an internal category code. So that's like we're transforming the data. Once we've transformed that data, then we move into a data source lookup. So we're going to check if the email exists in the CRM. If it does, we're going to return the contact ID, the account ID, and the last activity. And to do this lookup, to access this data source, we know we need a Salesforce API because we need to authenticate into that external service in order to get more data. From there, we're going to do some sort of transformation and enrichment, meaning we're going to make an API call to the company information database somewhere. We're going to add in the fields of company size, industry, and location. And there's some sort of erroring here where maybe the API fails, we could loop back and try again, but if it fails 3 times, we're just going to keep on going through the rest of the flow, which would be now we enter a decision point. So we see if the contact exists, we're going to update that record. But if it doesn't exist, we're going to create a new record. We have a data destination, meaning those 2 records we're either going to update or create. We're doing that in our CRM. So we need, once again, an API key to our CRM. We're going to do it in Salesforce. We're going to update the fields, and then we're going to map on the enriched fields in the CRM schema, meaning like name, email, company info, interest area, all this. It's going to map on the right columns. And then another data destination is we also want to receive some sort of notification. So sending it to Slack, we'll need to credential ourselves, authorize ourselves into Slack. We will send a new lead message, and then we'll format that in some sort of JSON payload likely to send over to Slack. And that's like the full journey of the data sources, the transformations, the credentials we need, how the data flows through, and then what it does, like what is the final destination of, okay, the workflow is done. And so as you can see, like this is a very clear process, and it shows how the data is accessed, transformed, and then delivered. It just moved from left to right across the whole process, across the whole flow. So to define these processes, steps, and logic, we're just breaking down complex processes into discrete steps, and this is essential for successful automation. So breaking down complex processes, we have single responsibility, which is one function per step, logical sequence, which is they follow a natural order, input, output, clarity, meaning each step, well, the process as a whole, the workflow as a whole, but also granularly, each step should have an input and an output, and then exception handling, anticipate and manage these errors because there will be errors. We also have identifying required actions and transformations. So for each step, is this going to be, what is the action here? Are we retrieving? Are we creating? Are we updating? Are we deleting? What are the tools we need? So is this going to be, can we do this in end-to-end? Like, are we just converting data in end-to-end? Or do we need to go to Slack to do something? The input requirements and the output requirements, and then potential failures. And then we have mapping the decision logic. So we have condition, which would be what triggers each of these branches. If it goes off this way or this way, like what is that decision point? We have branch identification, which means if it goes up this way, what happens next? Or if it goes down this way, what happens next? We have merging logic. So if it splits into the two paths, do they ever come back together? Like an example we saw earlier with that flowchart, or do they just kind of like go down their own paths indefinitely? Identifying that type of stuff could be a good indicator that maybe we want to send these off to sub workflows rather than keeping it all in one workflow. Not every time, but that could be a good indicator at sometimes. And then just default behavior. If none of those criteria are met that branch off into the two, what happens? Maybe it's just a third path, or maybe there's a default branch that will go down, something like that. So end-to-end has nodes like if, switch, and filter, and these nodes let you branch and use logic to send things off to different paths. And then at the end, you can use the merge node in end-to-end to bring everything back together in one line. So another practical example here, we have a document generation process. So we're going to take an action, which is collecting data. We're going to retrieve data. We're going to do that with an HTTP request. We know the input we're sending over, which is I want data from this date range. The output is going to be the data. And then we have error handling, like try 3 times, but if you fail on the 3rd time, then we're just going to keep going. Or actually, no. In this case, we wouldn't even be able to keep going because we don't have any data. So we would try 3 times. Otherwise, we would probably just send a notification like, hey, we failed, try again later. Then with that data, we have a transformation step. So we're going to calculate KPIs. We would use a function or a code node. We would input the raw performance data. We would output the KPIs, and then we would also have error handling, of course. Then we reach a decision point. So are any of these metrics below 80% of target? We would use an if and just say basically like if below 80%, do this. If not, do this. And so we would have like different branches, right? So we have these 2 branches. We would then have to decide what happens for each branch. Now we have an action step. We're going to generate a document, and we would use a create PDF report. We would have the tool to do so. We are giving it the process data and a template. We are expecting an output of a PDF document, and then we have error handling. We have our decision point with delivery method, which is who's the recipient. Is it going to go to an executive, a department head, or a team member? And based on which branch, we have a different way we're delivering it. And then finally, an action step is a notification, sending an email notification or Slack notification, as you can see. So hopefully I didn't like go too much there as far as like said the same thing over and over, but it's really important to understand each step and the different things that could happen at each step, because then, like I said, this is where complexities may pop up in your mind that you hadn't thought of earlier, and this will help you actually get into a workflow builder and build it out right the first time, or at least as close as right that you can be on the first try. So, yep. All right, so the fun stuff is integrating AI into these workflows and into our automations. And it takes these standard automations to a whole new level, and it's really cool stuff. And it's not too new. Well, I guess AI automation is more new, but automation's obviously not too new. And I remember when I was working in automation and I pitched these AI elements to some people on my team, and they were just completely mind blown. And I was really excited because I thought I was going to be doing AI automations at work, until they told me like, we can't. And I didn't understand why. I mean, I understood that financial data is sensitive, but I didn't truly get that like, the data would be running through a model, and there's just like a lot of exposure there, all that kind of stuff. But anyways, the AI capabilities in end-to-end, there's multiple AI ways. There's multiple ways for us to integrate AI. The first one that probably comes to mind is through an AI agent.
which enables us to feed in specific data and also system prompt it in a specific way. And then we also have the ability to do things like give it tools and have it structure its output and connect a different LLM to it. Because with our AI agents, we can give it a chat model, and that chat model can be Anthropic's Claude models, or it can be Llama, or it can be Mistral, or it can be OpenAI. So we have the ability to choose when we're setting up an agent, which brain do we want to give it. There's lots of times when we want to do different ones depending on the use case, but we have the ability to choose which brain do we want to give it. Then we have just a standard like large language model that we can run things through, and it's the exact same thing. So yeah, actually, I'm not even going to dive into that because it's the exact same thing as processing text with a large language model. Same exact thing as processing text with an AI agent. So not going to get into that. But we also have things like vector databases, because that basically uses like semantic search to, first of all, we send off a query to that vector database, and then it semantically searches and pulls stuff back. So you may hear terms like quadrant, pinecone, or Supabase, which all offer vector databases. And so what I'm talking about in this video is more about like how do you identify the opportunities for AI integration. And based on the previous videos of mapping out these steps and talking about decision points, you may have a good idea. But the reason I wanted to dedicate a video towards this is because I've been guilty of it too. But a lot of people have forced AI into processes where it's not needed, and all it's doing is going to waste you money, and it's going to increase the latency of the automation and probably increase the inconsistency of the end result. So you're looking for opportunities for AI in your process maps. And you're going to look for areas where you need text processing tasks, which could be content generation, summarization is a prime one, and then translation. Or maybe you need classification, so categorization, sentiment analysis, or intent recognition. And if you can't do those things with code or filters, you need AI. Decision support, you need to analyze data and suggest actions. Knowledge retrieval, we need to extract relevant info from large data sets using AI rather than like a SQL query. Or maybe you need AI to create that SQL query, which is another use case of AI. Or personalization, you want to tailor some sort of output based on a user context. So there's been those automated emails for years, right? Where you can automate them based on a placeholder or variables. So, hey, customer's name, blah, 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 from person's name. Excuse me. Sorry about that. Yeah, so like emails could be automated with placeholders, but if you want to automate personalized emails, that's when we need AI. So quick Excalibur diagram down here of a rule-based or an AI-powered decision point. Incoming data for rule-based, we're basically saying is X greater than 10. I think I did this example earlier, but if it is greater than 10, we're going to go this way. And if it's less than 10, we're going to go this way. And that's a simple filter. But now we need to analyze the actual content of an email and say, is it complaint, billing, or promotion? That's when we need AI. So to map these AI component requirements, what's the capability? What is AI doing? What is the input context? What information does AI need to make a decision? Output expectations, what type of decision does the AI make? Or like, what does that decision actually look like? Is that just branching, or is that outputting a different type of content? Integration points, where do we connect AI in, or does AI connect to any tools? And then fallback procedures, of course, is how to handle these AI errors. So practical example, content moderation workflow. Hopefully these practical examples are helpful to paint a picture, but maybe it's just like I'm saying the same things over and over. But we have a trigger, so we're getting it from a website form. We're feeding in text, author ID, and timestamp to an AI component, and it's going to use that to classify this content. So a text classifier node, we're going to give it the full text. We're going to tell it how to output things, which is going to be a classification. And we're basically saying, okay, you're going to read this and you're going to output either safe, unsafe, or review. And based on that output, it'll go down a different branch. So we've talked about all this kind of stuff before. Then we would just define what happens for each branch. As you can see, there's two different sort of paths here. Or we have where's the manual review? Okay, right here. So there's the AI component, or we have the manual review. And then after those, we're basically doing the data update, which is we're storing that decision somewhere with the following fields. And that is basically like a quick example of using AI to make a decision, but also we're looping back in human oversight if needed. So how do you get that process map now that you have the triggers, the nodes, the functions, the data retrievals, all that kind of stuff into something like n8n? So here's an example. We've got a trigger, and we would just kind of try to correlate that to some sort of node in n8n. So triggers a lot of times will be webhooks or schedules or events. Data retrieval a lot of times will be an HTTP request to some sort of API, or it will be a SQL query through to a database or a vector database. Or it will be an app specific node where, in your Gmail nodes, you can have like a get all or get emails, or an Airtable, you can have search Airtable or get records. Or in your CRM, you can say get records. And like that's how you're going to retrieve data, is through those type of operations. Then you have data transformations, which usually go in the form of the function node or the code node, the edit fields or the set fields, or you have summary nodes, or you have sort nodes. That's how other ways you can transform data. But typically transformations are going to happen within n8n. So we can use the native basic logic nodes. We don't have to send it outside of n8n to do something like a transformation typically. Decision points, we can use if, we can use switches, we can use filters, or we can use AI nodes. And then external systems is pretty similar to data retrieval, which is, HTTP request to an API, a database, or an app specific node. And then of course with AI, we have lots of different options. We have agents, we have basic chains, we have message and model node, we have text classifier, we have all these things. But that's like essentially when we're using AI, we're feeding in data, we're telling it what to do, and then it does something. So when it comes to implementation planning, of course, we want to select the nodes and we want to understand the integrations and the tool stack or the tech stack so that we can do that. For each of these nodes, we're probably going to need some sort of credential to actually get into that service. We're gonna have a development sequence, meaning we have a logical build order most of the time. Modularization is breaking the workflow into smaller tasks and sub workflows. Maybe it's not even that. Maybe it's more like we have this process and it's 30 steps. Let's break that process into tasks, and then we can sort of automate those tasks one at a time, and then we can combine them all together so it's easier to swallow. And then error handling. The best practices for end-to-end implementation is if there's templates, and by templates I'm typically meaning like modules or building blocks that you've already built out, go ahead and leverage those. You want to test in chunks. So whenever I'm building, I think if you've ever seen step-by-steps that I do, I'll usually like get data into that trigger, and I'll pin the data in the trigger so that I can test step by step, and I'll create the next node and move the data over and see if it works. And if it works, then I'll create another node and move the data over, and I'll just do that iteratively. I think that's pretty intuitive, but you don't want to build out the whole workflow and then hit run, and then you're going to error on all the steps, right? So that's what I talk about, pinning sample data. I'll show that when we get into n8n, but in the top right of most of the nodes, unless it's binary is funky in n8n, you can hit the pin button in the top right, and this basically means I'm just going to keep the data here. And that's really useful for something like an API call or when you're data retrieving. Because let's say something like Tavily, which is a web search API, I'm searching the web for Tavily, and that costs me 1 credit. I can then just pin that data there and keep it there while I'm testing things, so I can map my variables and do what I need to do with that data. And then every time I rerun it, I don't have to spend an API credit. So that's like why you can pin data. Clear naming, it's good to it's good to label nodes with purpose, but also you can use the sticky notes in n8n. So you've been seeing that on my templates recently, I'm sure, where I'm labeling everything of what's happening in each process. And you can use sticky notes to keep yourself organized with different functions. And then that kind of goes along with document everything so that you know what's going on in your workflows. You have them labeled, you have them in your right folders. And then if anyone needs to take over that workflow, they don't have to spend the whole time getting caught up with how it works. So that's kind of the integrating AI piece, and I just wanted to touch on that quick. It ended up being 11 minutes, so it wasn't super quick, but hopefully that all makes sense, and I'll see you guys in the next one.
I want to get this output. It can definitely be overwhelming as far as, I have this idea and I'm just going to jump straight into n8n and I'm going to start plugging things in. And now I'm a little lost as to where the data is flowing and what are the next steps here. And how do I know if I need to split this up into different workflows and call them as tools? And where do I insert my agents? Where do I insert my OpenAI node? All that kind of stuff. So wireframing is something that we've been doing for our client builds. And typically this helps for 2 reasons. One, it gives the client a visualization of this is what the solution is going to look like. This is how we're planning to tackle the problem that you brought to us. So that's the first one. And then also it helps us as a team align on how we're actually going to deliver this solution. And it helps us kind of think about some problems and complexities that may pop up before we actually get there and the complexities pop up. So essentially just the process of building out the system of agents or building out the workflow before you actually get into n8n and build out the workflow. That way, once you understand, what the integrations are, how data is going to be flowing through, where things are going to plug in, then as soon as you actually get into n8n, that process is
so much quicker. So we're not going to do any wireframing in this video. I'm just going to really quickly talk about how we break it down, how we wireframe, all that kind of stuff. We'll get into some more examples of actually doing some live wireframing based on like a project proposal sort of thing. But this one, we're just going to talk about wireframing. So and we'll cover some things about like the modular approach and why that's so important. Something that I've learned over the past couple of months is like, that's really going to save time down the line, is building with scalability in mind, with modularity in mind. So let's talk about that. Anyways, wireframing is like you're sketching out the blueprint of your build. So think of it as drawing a map of all the parts, how they connect before you actually start building the system. So this is going to involve you visualizing the workflow and the data. You're going to identify all the key components. What are the key integrations here? What are the triggers? What are the tools that we're going to be using? And basically like all the functionality that we need. What does that look like visually? And we do this to break down a complex idea that can be overwhelming upfront into little bite-sized parts. So breaking up a huge workflow into sub-workflows, and every sub-workflow is going to have tasks, individual tools, individual sections. And that's how we want to break it down and just chip away at the build. So like I said, modularity, I always use the example of building Lego blocks that are reusable. And each Lego block has a different function. So like with actual Legos, you've got like your 2-piece ones or your 3-piece ones or your circular ones. And you know when you need to grab each one in order to plug it in order to build like the Eiffel Tower or something. And then scalability is because we can easily adjust or replace parts without having to rework the whole system. So because we're going to be calling different little tools, if we want to change up some functionality, we could take out that piece and put in a different piece rather than having to restructure the whole workflow. Okay, so breaking down the build. Imagine you're building a series of tools that interact with each other. Here's how to break it down. You're going to start off by listing all the steps. You want to start by writing down every step that your agent needs to perform. So this could involve data input, and then with that data, that's the first step. Then we need to process it. So we're just going to focus on processing it. Then once we've processed it, we need to take this data and make a decision with it. And then finally, maybe another agent will take that decision and output something. So that's how you can break it down and make it seem more simple. Then kind of going along with that is identifying subtasks. So under each step, list all the little functions that are going to happen within those steps. So in the example of data processing, there could be these 3 different tasks in there, which are first we need to clean data, then we're going to format it, then we're going to analyze it, and then that turns into the data processing stage or bucket. And then we need to define the connections. So determine how each step feeds into the next. Think about what does the output of this step need to look like so I can feed it into the next step. So if we're, in the idea of AI agentic workflows, one agent doing something and then handing it off on a silver platter to the next guy, and the next guy's prompted to say, this is what you're going to get, and this is what you need to do. And then the next one is going to get another output, but we have to structure it in a way where they know exactly what's coming in, exactly what's coming out. They're specialized. It's going to lower the confusion and the overwhelmness. I don't know if that's a word, within the agents, all that kind of stuff, right? So this is just creating a system of smaller tools. So the modular approach with tools like n8n, we want to be able to build workflows as tools, which n8n is great for doing, that we can use. Because if you create a workflow as a tool and that trigger is like when called by another workflow, that tool can be called by 5 workflows, 6 workflows, 10 workflows, or just one. But the point is you can reuse those concepts. So if you're building out workflows as tools for an individual function, back in the day, before there were all these nodes as tools, like I had like a send email tool that was just like a couple nodes that would send an email. And then whenever I wanted to build an assistant, I could just hook it up to that tool. And then I'd have to build another tool for getting emails, and then I'd hook it up to that tool. So that's kind of the idea there. Creating modules, reusing them, and then being able to swap them out as well. So putting that all together with a wireframe, I use Excalidraw. There's also like Miro boards. I think Excalidraw is just a little more, I don't know, it just seems quicker and it seems crisp, if that makes sense. And then it's like $7 a month if you want to be able to like save your different Excalidraws as projects, which I would recommend because then you can keep a library of projects. Anyways, what you do here is kind of draw a box for each major step of your agent, which would be, you've got your input, you've got your agents, you've got your outputs, you've got your triggers, which can be inputs as well. You've got your data sources, you've got your tools, and just making a box or a circle or something like that and kind of creating your own taxonomy, I guess, of like how you want things to be defined in there, but labeling those boxes clearly so you can see. And then obviously you have like the ability to have arrows, and you can connect tools and you can make lines so you see what is able to interact with what. So like for instance, you'll have an agent, and then you'll draw arrows to different circles that could be tools. And then the tools, you can label what these functions are, because the tools won't connect really. The tools might not connect to the input, but they're connected to the agent. So then you can see like visually all of the interactions that could potentially happen and the data transfer there. Break down each box, like we talked about with data processing. You've got cleaning data, formatting data, etc. And then, like I said, with the connections, use arrows to show how data is going to move through the system, whether that's linearly or whether that could potentially be back and forth, all that kind of stuff. And then, something that we also do sometimes is like when we have to distinguish the difference between, is this a tool or a module that we have to build from scratch, or do we already have this and we can plug it in right away, which also can help at the end of the wireframe when we're looking at it, kind of estimating how much time it's going to take. If we see everything that's orange is something that we already have that we can pull off the shelf, we know that that's going to save a little time there. So the three main things to think about here are simplicity. Again, if you're trying to look at the entire build, it's going to be overwhelming. So start at a high level view, and then once you get like the general skeleton built out, you can maybe go back and drill down into some more specifics within each step. Flexibility, because even though you wireframe this out and you've got a good idea of what it's going to look like when you're building it, you're probably still going to get in there and realize, oh, like this doesn't really connect like that, or we actually need to make an HTTP request here rather than using this native node. And so things might change, and you'll just have to keep that in mind. And just if the wireframe's for you and just you internally, then just build it however it makes sense to you. I don't think there's specific. I don't know, like at my old job, when I would do kind of wireframes, not really, more like workflow. I don't know the word I'm looking for, but like workflow documentation, there was always like a standard procedure of like, these things must be colored this way. These must be labeled this way. Right. That's, I guess, not really the case, especially if it's just internal for you. But anyways, final thoughts here. By breaking down a complex build into smaller, more manageable parts, you're going to simplify it. You're going to make future updates easier, and you're going to be able to build scalable systems that grow with your needs. So just keep in mind the whole Lego block reference. Honestly, like as a kid, I didn't even really ever use Legos, so I don't know why that's like the first thing that popped into my head. But it's a good analogy, and it shows like the way that we're starting here with at the beginning. It seems big, but then as we're able to just continue down this process of drilling down, it's going to make the whole assembly of the workflow creation just quicker, more efficient, and it's really going to, you're definitely going to appreciate having a wireframe on one monitor over here to look at while you're in N8N on this monitor building out, and you can just keep looking back and forth like, okay, now I need to connect Gmail trigger to the agent and then give the agent access to do this. And like, I think it's just really helpful rather than trying to think about it in your brain. And that's where you might run into problems. So yeah, I hope this one was helpful, and leave me some comments on this video if anything in here wasn't too clear. I'll drop that doc in there so you guys can have this PDF to look at. But yeah, I'm excited to move into some examples of doing some live wireframes. All right, hey guys, wanted to make a video today in here about the approach of starting a client build. Obviously, that's something a lot of you guys are looking at doing. Is how can I service a client? How can I make sure that the relationship is good, and how do I make sure that we're aligned as far as what actually I'm going to be building for them? How can I make sure that it's adding value, and how can I make sure that they're happy with it so that they can either pay me to do another project for them, or ultimately refer me to one of their friends that also runs a business or something, so that I can continue to do more projects. So like I've said in multiple videos, one of the most important parts, it's always the beginning is super important. You got to gather requirements, you got to understand the business, because the goal usually is you don't want to just do one project with them and then go your separate ways. You want to continue to iterate and continue to build on top of what you've already done, because once you understand their systems, once you build out a sort of foundational aspect for them, it's easier and easier to build on top of that. So the goal is from the beginning, from the onboarding, or even before the onboarding, when you're going through these discovery calls and your sales calls, you want to understand how can I extract as much information as possible out of them. because a lot of times they don't understand exactly what goes into the builds, and you're the one that has to go in there and dig and pull information out of them to understand what their business does and to understand what they're looking for, so that you can almost be sort of like not just a developer for them, but also an AI consultant in the sense that you're going to get, understand their goals and show them a roadmap of how to get there. So we're going to do a quick one today. I'm going to talk about, different aspects of what you should be looking for, and then like a little wireframe and how that should work. And yeah, that's going to be what we're talking about today. So the first thing is you need to understand the business. Now, when I'm in my calls and I'm understanding, or I'm talking to these clients about their businesses, here are sort of the main things that I'm looking at. I want to get an overview of their business. I want to understand what they do, what their customers look like, how they make money. What is the process of getting customers, and how do you provide value to their customers? And then their primary business goals. And I want to understand both short-term and long-term goals so that they see that I'm invested in what they're doing and that I'm invested in helping them out in the long run. I want to understand their departments and teams, what departments make up their organization, what do the different departments and teams do, how do these departments interact and collaborate, because understanding this can help you in the future, help them implement more agents within their operations and just slowly chip away. How can we save this business and this department more time? And then understanding specific roles or workflows that are repetitive and time consuming. Obviously, that's where a huge opportunity lies. Figuring out these sort of things that the business owner might not even see initially, but saying, hey, have you thought about maybe doing this or implementing this within your sales process? Stuff like that. You want to understand their current business processes. This is pretty self-explanatory as far as like bottlenecks, inefficiencies, how their processes work. And then you want to understand their pain points and their challenges. So what are things that their business currently faces? What are, where are people wasting time? Where are people wasting money? That kind of stuff. Because over the past couple months, hopping on all these calls with clients, they usually see something online, right? Like they'll watch one of my YouTube videos about an inbox manager and they'll be like, oh, well, it looks great. I'd love to have that in my business. But that's not always the first step, and that's not always the most important step. So part of the job here is trying to understand, okay, I understand you have this need, but maybe we should implement this first and then move on to that need. So then it comes to technical understanding. So something that I often realized I was forgetting to ask about in the beginning was, what's their tech stack? How do you want these agents to be implemented into their business? Because every business uses different things, whether it's Google tools, Microsoft tools, Slack, Telegram, Monday.com, whatever it is. Ultimately, you want the tech stack to be as slim as possible, and you want it to be as least, how much should I say this? You want the headache for the client to be non-existent or at least minimal. So if you're able to integrate it into the systems they already currently use every day, and it's a very seamless integration, they're going to be just more happy with you because it's less time that they have to do sort of micromanaging you, providing you with API keys, switching over their CRMs, all that kind of stuff. But you also need to make sure that they're aware, okay, if you use a very niche tool, it may not have an API, we may not be able to connect to it, and we may not be able to get you this, but you can switch over to this system, whatever. Data and context, another huge part, obviously, where is their data being stored? How clean and organized is it? Do they have some sort of process as far as updating and managing their data? And then what type of data does the agent need, which kind of leads into the input and output requirements. What are the inputs that the agent's going to receive? Are these inputs things that you're going to provide to us, or are these inputs that we're going to have to build some agents to go get for us as well? What specific outputs are you looking for? And then where do you want these outputs? Do you want automatic posting? Do you want everything in a database? Do you want everything to be sent to you in Slack? That sort of stuff. Okay, now here's another thing that's important to think about that might not be so obvious is the value add. So you want to understand, what do you envision the agent doing? And how does this agent and the other agents that you're going to build provide value to the client? This is important because it's going to help you upsell. It's going to help you price. It's going to help you when it comes to sales, figuring out if this is something that's really valuable to the client. I'm able to encourage them to maybe want to expedite this process or bring on more developers for this project. That sort of stuff, right? ROI and impact. We want to be able to track things. We want to be able to show for both the client and for ourselves, how did what we did actually improve the business, improve their bottom line, improve their productivity? Because that proof is going to show them, okay, these guys for it. Let's refer them. Let's get them more business. Or for our side of things, we're able to make case studies on this because we have these metrics and statistics that prove that what we do works. Think about like an SMMA, right? It's super easy to show, okay, you paid me $4,000 a month. I got you $15,000 more in revenue because I helped you get 15 new clients this month. That's something that's really easy to show. When it comes to these productivity tools, that value adds a little bit more difficult to show. And so it's all about how can we track different metrics to show and prove with stats what we did for you. So something to keep in mind, right? And then we've got future goals. So we want to think about the scalability. How are we building a solution that we can continue to work with this client and scale for them? How can we integrate and adopt more agents within your business? And then just obviously at the end, testing and integration. So don't want to spend too much time here. You've got this to look over again if you want to look at the bullet points more in depth. But then I wanted to show just like basically what a wireframe kind of looks like. This is something that we do for every build. Of course, you want to understand and plan out what different systems you're going to be integrating with, what the inputs are going to look like, what the agents are going to build, or what the agents are going to build look like, what different tasks they have, how the agents are going to talk to each other, all that kind of stuff. So this is a quick one. And basically I just have like some notes down here about it, but I'm showing you like the source of the data, where we're getting the data from, what this database, how it interacts with the different agents, the different integrations for that, what this agent's going to do, different communication systems. And obviously this one's not super robust because this is one of the more robust systems that we have with different agent breakdowns. We have triggers, we have actions, we have integrations. We roadmap out this kind of stuff as far as what they're doing, the different actions and tools that they're going to do. So this is the kind of stuff that I'm going to break down more in the paid community. And then we'll also be looking at the actual builds to fulfill these wireframes. So if that's something you're interested in seeing more actual use cases of me interacting with clients, or like the way that I try to get stuff, the way that I wireframe, and then actually building out some of those automations, because obviously everything that I put on YouTube is not production ready. It's just kind of showing you guys, opening your eyes to the capabilities of these agents, but it's that last 20%. How do you bridge that gap from maybe a template that you download from internet somewhere, or like agent builds that you do? And then how do you actually push that into production? There's so many things that go into the different integrations, the testing, the credentials, all that kind of stuff. So if that's what you're interested in and you're kind of interested in growing an agency yourself, as far as, in the AI automation space, I would encourage you to check out the paid community. Like I said, the resource library in there is only continuing to grow. The members are continuing to grow, and the price will increase as time goes on. So if that's something you're interested in, I definitely hop in there and, just start contributing to that community. We've got the weekly calls, which are cool to just interact with people, see what type of projects they're working on. It's really about reps, and the more use cases that you see and the more use cases that you bring to yourself and develop, the more versed you'll be able to be. And that's valuable in the sense that you can speak on it better. It's easier to close sales. It's easier to just be trusted when you're talking about this kind of stuff. Even if you're not great on the development side of things, if you understand capabilities of AI agents and how they're able to be integrated, how they're able to save businesses time and money, which is what they want, if you can speak about that confidently, you're going to be able to close more sales. So that's just my little call to action here. And as you're building out these different wireframes, there's different ways to do it, but it's a really great way to visually show yourself and your client or your team of devs the vision. You want to make sure that you're aligned with the client on what is going to be built. And then if you're not actually doing the work, if you're hiring some developers to do the work, you want to make sure that they're also aligned with what you're aligned on, to make sure that everyone's going to be happy with the solutions at the end of the day. So showing exactly where the data is coming from, what it's going to look like, what agents can connect to it, what the agents are going to do, what actions they're going to have, what's going to trigger them, what the output's going to look like, where the output goes. If you can visually show all that kind of stuff, it's just going to make your job so much easier when you get into end-to-end and you see this and you're just kind of dragging stuff in there. So I hope this one was helpful. If you got any questions, feel free to drop one, or drop one in the comments, and we can talk about it. And so thanks for watching this one, guys. Okay, so just recorded that video in this post. That one went in the free community, where I was just basically walking through my process as far as the discovery calls and the sales calls that I hop on with clients that I'm looking to close. And this is the kind of stuff that I talk about with them, right? So I went over this in that other video. Feel free to check that one out first, and then we'll hop into here. I also just showed a very brief, very high-level wireframe, an example of what it could look like, and just talked about the benefits of why you want to make sure that you and the client are aligned on what we're seeing here, and a good place to leave notes about changes you want to make, ideas, just kind of feedback, right? So that was for the free community. I wanted just to give them a taste of some valuable things to ask about, because some of the stuff isn't something that you would originally think about, and things that I've had to learn along the way. And then this quick one, and then here I wanted to just break down a recent one that I've been looking at. So at this point, right, we've gathered requirements. We've hopped on a couple calls with a client. We've talked about their business. We've talked about their pain points, and we've talked about why they booked in a call, right? So we've got 3 agent breakdowns here. So we've got an article writer, a case study writer, and a newsletter writer. So similar, some aspects are similar as far as the way the data is coming in, the way the data is coming out, the integrations, but the capabilities and the actions of each agent are a little different. So high level here, we just basically we're taking our meeting notes. We're writing down some of the things that come to mind with different triggers and different actions. So for example, let's just dive into the article writer. As you can see, we've got the three different agents here, 3 different phases for each one. Phase 1 is basically the same as far as the data aspect, and we'll pretty much just talk about this first article writer today. But so first thing we want to do is look at the triggers, right? What kind of information does the agent get? What starts the process of the agent? And what is it integrated with? So triggers here, we've got Slack message. We're basically sending the agent, article categories, details. and we need to get approval of the article via Slack and approval of the headline via Slack. So these are different triggers that will come into play. It'll be sort of like human in the loop, where it'll bounce back, get approved, bounce back, generated, bounce back, get approved, that sort of thing. Capabilities and actions. We've got draft the article. That'll be based on the user input. The user kind of wants to approve the article before headline's written. From there, it'll get approved again. Then the LinkedIn post will be generated based on that article and headline. It'll go back, collect feedback, and then it'll basically iterate that for all outputs. So in this case, we were thinking once the post has been made with the article and the headline, it'll bounce back to the human. And all of this integration really, in this case, is happening through Slack. But it's going to bounce back. It's going to request images from the human because we're not at the point yet where we want AI to generate these images. It'll request some other information like the author name, the publish date, and then it's going to populate into the CMS with the content so that it can be posted ultimately. So we'll grab the links to post through the Slack channel. That way it'll lead to other articles, and then we'll schedule the post pretty much. So key integrations here are Slack, the CMS, and the LinkedIn API. And then we like to break the build down into phases where we also estimate the time and time estimation. And, I've talked about this when it comes to pricing. I try to stay away from a project-based model because it's so hard to estimate. It's truly so hard to estimate. You don't know the complexities that are going to pop up. You don't know, obviously in the case of project basis and the project scope change a little bit, I'm sure that you guys would work out some sort of flexibility where you can adjust, but sometimes changes happen. Sometimes you realize that there's not APIs that are well enough to connect, or sometimes you realize you have to go another route. So staying away from the project basis is the way that we've been doing it lately. And now there are some objections when it comes to, okay, well, if you're charging me based on the hour, how do I know that you're not going to lollygag and basically just milk me for money? That's just an aspect of how you position yourself and how you talk about, the transparency aspect of we're going to have these touch points, or we're going to show you what we're working on. So there's multiple things to figure out depending on your model, but that's just kind of what I do right now. So here we have phase one, which phase one of every build for me in the past couple months, the common theme I've seen is that phase one is always about some sort of RAG aspect, and before that is the database. So how do we automate your data pipeline? How do we get all the information that you currently have into a vector database, if it is a vector database? How do we take the data that you have, whether it's optimized or not, and how do we get that optimized into a system where we can recall it accurately, we can filter through the metadata, we're able to make sure that it's iterative so that if you have changes or if you want to update things, that we can get that also put back into the vector database in a timely manner. So that's the kind of stuff that comes into mind. We pretty much will just populate, okay, here's the database, here's what it's going to look like, here's what's going into it. And then we basically show them the system. Usually it's a little more robust than this, where we'll show the actual integrations here. So we have, let's say this information was coming from a Google Drive. We could have we'd have Google Drive over here. So whatever the actual system of the data, so we'd have Google Drive, and then we'd show that arrow coming into the different nodes that we'd want in order to get it into the database. And then from there, we'd obviously show the connectivity of the database to the RAG agent. Sometimes this would involve adding different actions within the database. So we'd have a Gmail trigger if maybe we were pulling in emails. And then maybe from there we'd have, what's another thing that we could do? I guess if we were showing iterative, right? We'd have update and delete old records. And then from there we could also have another, okay, so I don't know, these would be like the actions, right? And then from there we'd have the actions that would lead into this agent. So the database is leading to the agent, but as you can see, this is sort of the system we have here, where it's going to generate the metadata filters and search for queries to retrieve the relevant content. We could also maybe have here that we have the aspect of tagging metadata. So it really just depends on the use case. And then we give a build estimation, and so that's phase one. Usually it involves this is kind of the proof of concept demo where we align again with the client and show them this is what we've worked on. Everything that we talked about in the next phase is feasible because we've sort of done that R&D phase, the research and development phase, and then we sort of move on from there. So in this phase two, we've got the actual article writer. As you can see, these are the different actions that this article writer has, and then from there, we show which agents will be taking those actions. So in this case, it's basically just here's what's going on, right? So we have the first stage is the action of writing an article based on the user input. From here, it writes the article, and then it sends the article to the user for approval. So in this case, we'll be using the Slack agent to go get that approval, and we'll be using the RAG agent to pull back information to write that article. Then we have another action which is triggered when this article originally gets approved. The action here is to write a headline, and then we're sending that headline over to Slack with the agent for user approval. Once again, we've got these guys. Another trigger is when the headline is finally approved via Slack, then we'll write the post, and then we'll send that LinkedIn post to the user for approval. So these are pretty, similar. And then finally, when the user is okay with this final post, it'll say launch, or it'll hit a button that says approve. the agent will collect the article and the headline and the post from the Slack messages and then submit it to a shared team channel in Slack with the final post. And that's just kind of how the way the client in this case requested it. Also, one thing to mention is there's no sort of loop going on between these stages where if the user doesn't approve, it'll go back and it will get regenerated. What he wanted here was, okay, if you give me an article and I don't approve it, I will pretty much just refine it myself in Slack and then approve it and send it back. So it's not going to be like a ChatGPT prompt where you go back until it's good. In this case, he just wanted an initial draft. If it's good, it's good. If it's not, I'll change a few words and then I'll send it off. So the end of this process, the input basically, over here, right, we have, this would be the input, and then this goes into the article writer. And in this case, the input would be, it's getting the article based on the user input right here. And then once that's done, what we're outputting is the final post with the associated URLs and the articles and whatever. And then we basically send this into the posting workflow, which is the requests are fulfilled, everything's good, the final post is approved. That's when it triggers. The action here is it's being uploaded to Craft CMS so that it can ultimately be uploaded to LinkedIn. We're going to wait until the article is greenlit. So again, we'll have another step of approval here. That is a trigger. Once it's greenlit, it's going over to another action, which is scheduling the post, and then finally another action, which is sending that post to the development Slack. So sort of a simple process here, right? So it's just basically breaking down what's going on and just a simple wireframe. And from there, that's phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 of that first agent. This is going to be a month or so progress as far as this workflow. And then from there, we move on to agent number 2, similar setup. The RAG aspects in agent number 2 and agent number 3 will slightly be shorter time because we've already developed that foundation. But it's same thing, moving from here to here, moving from here to here. We've got our posting workflows at the end, our scheduling workflows at the end. And then in the middle is the bulk of the work, right? Which is the actual writer. And that writer has different agents, different actions to take based on, the actual content and the input. So just wanted to show you guys, if you guys like seeing these sort of, wireframes, I can definitely highlight some more. We've got a ton of these wireframes in our database just based on different clients. Like I said, a lot of times these are used sort of on the kickoff call, just in the proof of demo calls to make sure that we're aligned. Sometimes if it's big clients, we want to actually build out these wireframes to try to close them, to show them that we mean business and that we have ideas already. But yeah, you just kind of got to feel out. But ultimately, this is always part of the process, whether that's for me to align with the client. Well, it's always for me to align with the client. But whether it's just that, or sometimes if you want to make sure that the dev team is understanding what's going on, just having a session of sitting down and wireframing everything out together. This is also, like I said, so much easier to do this and understand the logic once you really have a good feel for N8N compared to getting into N8N and then trying to do everything, because that's when you're going to do a lot of deleting, a lot of resetting. And if you can pretty much have a really solid idea of all the flows that you want in N8N already, like if we already know this whole process and the different tools that are going to be broken down and what we want, and we can just hop in N8N and start plugging things in. So yeah, hopefully this one didn't go too long, and hopefully it was valuable. Any questions, feel free to drop a comment. DM me. I'd love to talk about this kind of stuff. But anyways, thanks for watching, guys. Hey guys, so I wanted to talk about context engineering. So I just made a YouTube video about this, which will be linked below in this sort of resource. But the reason I wanted to put it here before we jump into N8N, I don't want to get too technical here. I don't want to overwhelm, but this is going to be a really important kind of like mindset shift to have going into building things in N8N. So, this module, we talked about stuff like data sources and transformation. We talked about integrating AI and like planning out your workflow. And so some of this stuff, like we've got some visuals here to show what it may look like in end-to-end. And of course, this PDF will also be linked down below. But some of this stuff, I'm not going to get too technical, like I said, but just the way we think about, like when we're setting up our agents, like what is the end goal? So I built over 200 AI automations, and I'm just going to break down 6 kind of like context engineering lessons. And don't be intimidated by the term engineering. Same thing as like prompt engineering. It's very, very simple. Engineering is just thinking about the way that we build it so that it's, the most effective, right? So context engineering is the practice of feeding your AI agent the right a single instruction. Context engineering is about building systems that dynamically provide relevant information so the agent can make smart decisions. So the best analogy here is, like what I have down here, and I'd love it because I think it's just so applicable. Prompt engineering is basically like you study for the exam, you cram all week, and you have to memorize everything. And then once, you go into that exam room to take the test, you have to do it all based on memory. So that would be like giving our agent basically no context or tools and making it cram and understand what it needs to do. And then we're just going to feed it tons of questions and expect it to do everything right. It will get things right, but not as accurately as if we had context engineering, which basically is like our cheat sheet. So you get a little note card that you take into the exam with you. And now I can look at a question. I can say, okay, I don't remember this, but I know on my note card I have this information. So I'm going to go find it, and then I'm going to answer more accurately. So that's kind of what it is. And really, it's something that you've probably already done or understand. It just needs to be thought about a little bit deeper, which is giving your agent the access to different context. So what we have here is like what an end-to-end AI agent looks like, right? So we have a couple different things that I wanted to highlight here. The first one is the user input. So this is the dynamic question that it's going to be getting every single time. That feeds in as context. Then it has its instructions. So this is kind of where the prompt engineering comes into play. And this basically tells the agent, okay, here is what your role is, here's what you do, and here are the different tools you have access to get more context. So based on the message coming in, I need to look in my memory real quick, which is context. I need to maybe look in my retrieved knowledge Supabase vector database. Maybe I need to look in my tool. Maybe I need to also understand the type of output that I need to give. So don't worry too much about like these actual physical pieces in end-to-end. Just think about the fact that when you have an agent, it should be able to access different things in order to get the right information. And that's just an example of what that could look like. So memory is kind of the first one we talked about. There are different types of memory in your AI agents. You've got working memory, which basically means for each query, the agent's going to have a log of like, here's what I'm going to do, and this is like the things I've done already. And that's on like an execution basis. So if you ask the agent to do something and it calls 3 different tools, it's going to remember what it's doing as it's running. But without short-term memory, as soon as that execution's over, it forgets everything. Clean slate, starts over. So short-term memory lets us basically look at recent conversations. So here's just a quick example down here where I'm having a conversation with my AI agent. I said, sorry if it's small. I said, hi, my name's Nate. It said, hey, Nate, how can I assist you? I said, I have a dog named Workflow. That's a great name. How old is Workflow? What kind of dog? I said, he is a golden retriever. What should we do this weekend? And then it tells me stuff because it remembers my name's Nate and it remembers that I have a dog named Workflow. But what happens here is this short-term memory basically works with a context window. So if we have a context window of 3, here's our first message, here's our second message, here's our third message. If we try to talk to our agent again, it would then lose this first message, and then it would keep 1, 2, and then whatever comes next. So it's just going to be the last 3 messages. You have the ability to make the context window more or less. Your trade-off there is if you have a larger context window, you're going to be processing more conversations. And if you're processing more conversations, that costs more tokens, so it costs you more money. At a high level, I just want you guys to understand how this stuff works. We don't have to get too technical now. I won't even touch on session ID stuff. That's basically just the ability for your agent to have different conversation windows and histories with different people. So, in your contact, in your phone, you're texting Nate, we're having our conversation, and then you go to text, your dad, and you and your dad have a conversation, and they're separate. So there's that, and then there's also long-term memory, which is basically more persistent information that survives across sessions. And this can be stored in multiple ways. It could be in a user graph, it could be literally just in a Google Doc, it could be a vector store, it could just be your CRM. But the idea here is that long-term memory is something that gets processed every single run. And it's like the system prompts, maybe the agent just knows it rather than having to go grab it. So that's like memory. Now we have where things get interesting with dynamic RAG and tool calling, which basically means your agent gets your question and it understands, I don't know the answer, but I have this tool to go get the answer. So that's where it gets cool. And tools can be a vector database, it can be searching the web, it can be accessing a CRM. There's different ways to have a tool. So in here I have like, my example with the Ultimate Assistant. If I asked it to send an email, it knows I can send emails with my email agent tool, but Nate asked me to send an email to Michael Scott, but I don't know Michael Scott's contact information. what I can do is I can go right here to my contact agent, and that's how I can get that information. And then I can go send the email because now I have what I need. So without that context of knowing I have a contact agent that I can get that, it would never be able to send the email to Michael Scott. It would need an actual email. Or it would probably just make one up and then, it doesn't go anywhere. So there's RAG and memory. RAG and tool calling. And then this kind of goes along with RAG because I think a lot of people, when they think of RAG, they think of vector search. And, we've talked about in Agent Zero vector databases and what those are. Not going to dive too deep into here, but I'm just going to talk about RAG isn't always vector database stuff, right? Because when you have stuff into a vector database, it gets chunked up into vectors. So we have a text here, and let's pretend this is a YouTube transcript. So I have a YouTube transcript, and I chunk that up. So it has to go into 3 chunks because the YouTube video is too long to all be one chunk. Those chunks get processed, and once those are processed as an embedding, it gets put into the vector database based on the meaning of these chunks. So let's say this first chunk up here means it's a YouTube video where I'm talking about AI agents. So it gets placed up here, and any other chunks about AI agents will be placed near it. In this chunk, let's say I'm talking about perplexity. So it goes over here with other like web search chunks or, based on the meaning. And then finally, I'm talking about the school community. So down here is like community, right? So they're placed differently. But the issue is we don't know that these chunks relate to each other. We don't know they're coming from the same YouTube video. And that's why you can do stuff like metadata to just enrich the context of, these chunks. We can say, okay, what title of the full video and what URL of the full video did they come from, just to give more information about the vector. So metadata means data about data. So it's not in the chunk. It doesn't affect the meaning or the placement. But when we pull back the chunk, we can look at more stuff about it. So it's like, imagine you have a library of books and you're reading different books, but none of them have metadata, like when the book was written and who the author was. So otherwise, you'd be searching all your books in the library, but you just wouldn't know more about them. So we enrich it with metadata, like, okay, this book was written by Charles Dickens and it was written in 1990 or whatever. I don't know if that was even remotely accurate. But now we just have more information about the book, right? It doesn't change anything about, like, within the actual chapters of the book. Fifth one, we have summarization techniques. So essentially, like I said earlier, every time you process a token, that costs you more. If you're using a closed source if you're using like, a closed source model that's hosted in the cloud by someone else. If you're running stuff locally, it's free because it's running locally, right? So the idea is if you can process less words, you're going to spend less money. So an example here is an AI agent that's searching through a Supabase vector database. And let's say it pulls back 4 chunks and each of those chunks have 500 words. It's then processing 2,000 words. What we could do is we could set up something like a flow to, rather than process 500 words per chunk, we're going to have a different system extract, with maybe a cheaper model, summarize the big chunks and just pull out the most important highlights. So this could turn from, 2,000 words to 10 words or 20 words that are just the most important things that the main agent needs. So right now, if this looks confusing with like the tool calling and the sub workflow, don't worry about that. That's not what I'm trying to drive home. I'm just trying to drive home the mindset of making things shorter if possible to save money. And finally, the mindset, which is just kind of wrapping it all together of why I wanted to make this video for you guys before you get into building some stuff. So start with the end in mind. I know we talked about that a lot with process mapping and wireframing. And that is how you basically understand the type of queries and the type of questions your system would be handling in order to make your context better. So same thing with like an exam. You're making a cheat sheet. But if you didn't know what type of questions were going to be on the exam, you wouldn't know how to make a good cheat sheet. A clean dynamic data pipeline. I'm not going to talk about that right now. It's just a little more technical. Data accuracy, of course. Context windows, making stuff shorter if possible. And then specialization is another good one to talk about. When you have like different things you want to process with AI, rather than sending everything into one AI model that you prompt, split it up into different, specialized tasks, like an assembly line. If you're building a Jack in the Box, it's going to be way more efficient and probably a higher quality Jack in the Box if you have one person doing the handle, one person making the spring, one person making the clown, and one person making the box, and then they're basically just getting really, really good at their specific thing. If I got really good at making those springs, I could pump out 10 of them really quick, compared to someone that would need to make a spring, handle, box, clown, and then start from the beginning. It's just like specialization with these AI workers that you can prompt better. They can become, you can refine that prompt over and over, and they're focused on one thing rather than overwhelming them with multiple aspects. So that is what I want to talk about today. This PDF will be dropped down below. Once again, I'll have a full there's a full YouTube video where I do go over this kind of stuff in a little more depth. And in that YouTube video, what I do is I go over this Excalidraw here, where I'm kind of talking about the same things, right? And I have a little bit more pictures and more context about some stuff with n8n, but I'll also link that Excalidraw in this post as well if you do want to just go check it out. But it's kind of similar to this document here anyways. So yeah, appreciate you guys watching this one, and yeah, I'm excited to hop into like actually building some stuff now. And I think it's really important. We've set a good foundation, so let's go start building some stuff. See you guys in the community. Hey guys, so today we're doing a live wireframe, and I have a simple project requirements document here. We have a personal assistant, we have a inbox manager, and then we have a daily summary. And what we're going to do is we're going to start off actually by wireframing out the daily summary, because this is a very linear flow. It is basically, you know, there's a trigger, we've got some things to do, we have a summarization, and then we're sending it off. We're going to start off there. Then we're going to go into an inbox manager, which is also a simple workflow. However, this one contains some routing elements, so a little more complicated than the daily summary. And then finally, we'll end off with the actual personal assistant, which has a few sub-agents and different tool calling that has to be worked in. So it's just going to be a little bit more of a complex setup, but still not too bad. So the point of this video really, like I said, it's going to be a live wireframe, just show you guys sort of how I approach. Now that I understand, you know, at this point I've scoped out a build with a client, we understand the core tools and functionality that we're looking for, and now we need to get this onto a wireframe so that I can show it to the client. We can make sure that we're aligned on how this is going to look, and then ultimately when we get into n8n and we need to start building out this system, it's plug and play, building a Lego thing, because we already have the instruction manual, whatever you want to call it. So we'll be flipping back and forth to this doc, but like I said, we're going to start off with the daily summary. So the tool that I'm using, and the tool that you always will see when I've done YouTube videos or previous videos in this community about wireframing, it's Excalidraw. So Excalidraw is also open source, I believe, which is pretty cool. I'm just right now using a cloud, but it is open source, and you can get it off of the GitHub repo and then pretty much run that locally. So as you can see, it's kind of like a whiteboarding thing. Yeah, but I'm just using it in the cloud, $7 a month. I probably should just run it local, but I get caught up in other things. Anyways, so we're starting off with the daily summary workflow. So let me just label this real quick. We'll bring this up here, and let me just see how big the regular text is. Okay, let me just zoom a little bit. Cool, so starting off with the daily summary. This, like I said, this project requirement doc isn't the most detailed. Typically what you want to have on here is like the functionality. You want to have who is, you know, what are the stakeholders maybe within each piece, or what are the different integrations you may need. So like I said, I just kind of talked into chat to have it make this based on this project that we had done, but I'll fill in the gaps here for you. Anyways, as you can see right here, it's going to be triggered. What you need to start off with a workflow or with an Excalidraw wireframe is always a very clear trigger. You know, what triggers this? Even if it's a multi-trigger setup, that's fine, but you have to understand, when does this workflow actually start? And in this case, we scheduled it to start every day, every weekday at 5 a.m. So we know we have like a cron scheduled trigger. And then we have different things we need to do. So first, we're going to fetch today's events from Google Calendar. Then we're going to fetch due or active tasks from monday.com. So those are two integrations we're already aware of: calendar, monday.com. We're going to summarize calendar and tasks, so that's likely going to be with some sort of AI node. And then we're going to send that summary over to Slack. So there's three integrations I'm seeing. I'm seeing an AI use case because we have to summarize something. But besides that, we don't need any sort of agent. There's no sort of, you know, non-deterministic reasoning that's going into this flow. It's going to be pretty simple. And let's just hop into Excalidraw and build this thing out real quick. So like I said, first thing we're going to do is grab a trigger. I like to color code per project. So I think that, you know, what makes sense usually is to have colors and shapes for certain things, but I just like to make sure my triggers are a certain color, my actions are a certain color, and then my AI LLM calls are a certain color. So we'll just start off with a yellow. What I'm going to do here is just say, you know, this is a 5 a.m. and above it, I'm just going to label this as a trigger, so we all know that this is going to be what triggers the whole workflow. So, you know, in n8n, when you have a trigger, you've got like a little lightning bolt. We just have the word trigger. Anyways, I'm going to grab another thing here. And what we know is, you know, this is going to be a tool. So we'll just make this one blue. And this is going to be a Google Calendar. And the reason we know this is a Google Calendar is because in our doc, we know that we need to grab today's events. So I'm just going to link this up at 5 a.m. It's going to trigger, it's going to hit our Google Calendar. And what is Google Calendar going to do exactly? Well, it's going to take action. So down here, I'm just going to list an action. I'm just going to, let me just move this guy out of the way. There, that works. Just signifying that it's related to the Google Calendar and it's an action, but it's not the actual node. And what I'm going to say here, what is Google Calendar doing? It's going to fetch today's events. And so this isn't to say that we have to get in there and know exactly how we're configuring this node. That's something that we can easily figure out later. But this is going to easily show the client or the stakeholder, this is exactly what Nate is planning to build. And I completely agree. This is what I want and this is how I want it. So then there's no room for like, we didn't agree on this type of thing. So this is the action. I'll even just, I'll throw a little word down here that says action. So now we can see that the action down here is going to be from Google Calendar. We are fetching today's events. So cool. I'm going to copy this over because we know what's next is we're going to take another action. So I'm just going to connect these up. This is happening linearly once again. So trigger, then Google Calendar, and then not Google Calendar again. Now we're going to go to monday.com. I'm just going to copy this over, paste it right here. And what we're doing over here is another action, but we are fetching today's tasks. So we'll just leave it like this for now. Obviously, we can get a little more detailed on what that actually means and what's the criteria to filter what are today's tasks. Do we want things that are just due today, or do we want everything this week that's due? What does that look like? Right now, that's where the client, we would look at this and he can give more details and we can just, throw a little note on client's thoughts. We would just basically type them down here. But right now, we don't have to worry about that. We're just building out the architecture to validate that we know what we're doing and we know exactly how we're going to get into N8N and build this thing out. Cool. So we've got our calendar integration, our monday.com integration, and what's next is we need to summarize those things. So now what we're going to do is we're just going to bring over another node. We're going to connect it up. We're going to, first of all, we know that we're going to use AI for this, so I'm just going to make this one green so we know it's AI. I'm going to say, this will be like a basic chain or an LLM or whatever we want to call it. Actually, yeah, we'll just go LLM. And then we're going to have an action. So I'm going to come down here. We'll keep this as action. We'll just make it green. And we'll say, what are we getting as an input? One thing I might want to do as well is also show that, I want to also maybe show that Google Calendar is going to be going in here. It's not going to just be monday.com. So now we can kind of visually see that Google Calendar results as well as the monday.com results will both be going into the LLM call over here, as you can see. And then we're basically just going to say summarize calendar and tasks. So that's very clear, right? And then finally, we know the last thing we need to do is we need to integrate back with Slack and send that summary, which is just going to be, the output of this LLM. So we'll finish this over here. We will just say send summary, and then we're finally just going to connect that LLM output to Slack. Cool. So this is actually, what the workflow looks like. It's literally going to be a trigger with a calendar node, a monday.com node, a summary, and then a Slack node. I at this point, this is a very simple workflow. Usually when I'm workflowing something out like this, wireframe something out, this is where I'd look at it and understand, okay, where could things go wrong? What could the edge cases be here? This is super simple because it's going to be the exact same thing every day. I did notice that I had some questions pop up in my head, like with monday.com, how do we define today's tasks? What does that look like? And then I would just have a note down here, ask client about this, ... And then I can just make notes and we'll go over this thing together and we'll be so much more aligned than we were before I did this wireframe. So that's a daily summary, okay? Cool. Let's move on to the next one, which is going to be the inbox manager. So we'll just grab this. The trigger we can see is going to be an incoming Gmail email. We're going to have contact management functionality, which basically means if the email coming in does not exist in the Google Contacts database already, we will extract the name, email, position, company, whatever it is, using an LLM and then add that to the contacts. And then finally, we will have our different actual email categorization rules and actions. It looks like we only need to do a summary for billing emails. We have VIP emails and we have internal emails. And this is really cool because if you notice, we don't have to use any AI to categorize the emails so far. Billing is going to come from a certain email address. VIP is coming from 4 specific addresses, and internal is also coming from specific email addresses. So we don't have to use any AI to actually route these emails off. Sometimes you'd have to use AI to read the content of the body and then route them along. But in this case, it's going to be really easy because we just need logic. It's going to be a simple, it'll be either a switch or it'll be an if to say, does the email sender equal this? If yes, go this way. If no, go this way. So yeah, I think it seems pretty simple to me. Let's get into our wireframe and let's, we'll just go down here and we want to fill this in with inbox manager and let's get started on this thing. So we have a trigger, which I'll just grab from up here, but we know this trigger is a little different. We know this trigger is not a 5 a.m. trigger. This is a Gmail trigger. Actually, we don't have to list trigger twice. We'll just say new new Gmail. So that's what's going to trigger the workflow. The first thing we'll tackle is the contact management. So I think what we'll do is we'll run it through an initial check right away. So actually, no, we'll probably have it route off 2 different ways, but we'll figure that out in a sec. So let me just grab an actual node. I like to keep all the sizes the same, so I always just copy it. This is going to be a Google Contacts. So this is where the contact database lives. So we're going to send the new email into this node, and what it's going to do is it's going to take action, and it is going to basically check if contact exists. So we've got check if contact exists. And how does that work? It's basically just going to be searching the contact. So what we're going to do is we're not going to be checking here. We're just going to be searching for contact. And what I imagine is going to happen is the result from this node will either say, like yes, contact exists, or it'll say no, could not find, or there'll be some sort of error message. So what we need to do is we'll need to come in here and understand what do the outputs look like if contact doesn't exist. And this would actually be, what does the output look like? I was going to say, what do the outputs look like if it exists versus if it doesn't exist, but that's fine. So now we have our question, and we can understand that what we want to do from here is we're probably going to have a core logic node, which will be like an if. And this one will just be not exactly an action, but just more like, a check. And we'll be checking, does contact exist? So this is something where I don't know the answer yet, but we would just run this. We would run 2 examples, and we'd see it's going to either be a yes or a no. So from here, we route off. We would basically have a yes branch and a no branch. So this will be the yes branch, and this is just gonna be a simple do nothing, and we'll just signify right here. Yes, contacts exist. Yes, and no. We'll come down here and we will say we're basically going to send you off to we need to extract the information. So this is going to be an AI node. We'll say LLM. We'll drag this off. So hopefully I'm not going too fast. Hopefully everyone is following along what's going on here, right? So we're basically, if contact exists, yes, we're going to do nothing. If no, we're going to use the LLM. And what we're going to do with the LLM is we are going to, let me just get my colors right here. This is going to be an action. We're going to extract whatever info we can, really. And we're going to set that up, whatever info we can. And we have to predefine what the LLM will be looking for. So just to make this easier, I would actually use an information extract node, which is an AI node, and we define, okay, you're going to be reading an email, you're going to be looking for a name, a phone number, an email, a company, a position, a address, whatever it is. And so here's what we list off, like what we're going to set up. So name, email, phone number, company, position, etc. So this is where we would understand like what we're going to extract. I'm just going to leave that below. And then this is also where the client can say, okay, also you might as well see if you can extract their income or something. I don't know. Anyways. Once we have that extracted, I think the only thing left to do down this branch is basically just, we're going to be adding back data. So create new contact. I believe that's all we're doing here. So let me just make my capitalization consistent. It should only be the first letter. Sometimes I like to make everything capital. This one is, yeah, I'm going to change that up. Send summary, summarize calendar and tasks. Cool. And then we're just going to connect this. And then this is really the end of this flow. So as you can see, that's kind of the inbox manager. But what we have to do is set up the rest of the flow. So I don't know if that's going to be, if we're going to branch it off here. What we could do is just kind of bring this trigger over here. And then we would set up a flow down below. That would be the routing flow. So let's just do that for the sake of example. I'm going to condense this guy right there. And we're going to have another branch kind of come down here. So let's do down here, we'll do a switch. So we're going to do a switch, which is basically going to be checking for the sender of the email. So this is going to say basically the action is, or sorry, yeah, this is a check. So we're checking the email sender. And I did the capital thing once again. So we're checking the email sender. We're going to have different things to check for. So let me first of all just bring this up a little closer. Actually, no, we can move stuff around later. That's not what matters. That's not high leverage. What's important is that we're getting this right. So billing emails is the first one. That's going to come from bill@approvals at client.com. So what we'll do is we will come down here. We will have that be one of the options. We'll do it down here. So 1 will be that. 2 will be our VIP emails. So we don't have to actually put those in. We'll just say the VIP emails. And then 3 will be wildcard at client.com. So anything that's internal coming from at client.com. And this is interesting because once we get into end-to-end, we may realize we can't use a switch because they have like an overlapping type of criteria. Technically, we'd have to do equals this, equals one of these four, and then equals that, or contains that. We may end up needing to use multiple ifs, but for now, for sake of demo and just for sake of how we think about this, as long as we make sure that they get routed off appropriately, we'll be good. So let's actually move this up because I have an idea of what I want this to look like. So we're gonna have 3 branches coming off here. So the first one's gonna be billing. Let's just grab one of these and let us do a Gmail. What's going to be going on here is we are going to take action, which is going to be label email as, we can make this capital, as billing. We'll route this into here, and we will just real quick copy this email just to show that this is if it goes down this branch. So I don't really like that. I guess we have to just expand it out so it looks better. Yeah, let me see here. I'm gonna move these things up a bit. I don't like that either. We'll be fine. Okay, we'll be fine. We'll be fine. Sorry, like half of this video is just gonna be me arranging this kind of stuff just to make sure it's the way I like it. Okay, anyways. So we have our, if it's going down the billing branch, we're gonna first of all label it as billing. Now, one thing that you need to think about is this new Gmail, when it comes through the trigger, we need to be passing this message ID over here so that we can label the correct email. So that's one thing I'm just going to make a note to myself to remember. Must label email, or no, must get message ID from trigger to label the correct email. So we'll basically just be pulling that through as a variable. And now we can go on to our next action, which actually will be an AI node. So I'm going to grab this. I'm going to grab this, and I'm basically just going to say this is a LLM, and what we're doing here is we're just going to be summarize email. We'll connect that in because we also know, based on this doc, billing emails are the only ones that we want to summarize and send to Slack. So super easy, and then we're just going to grab we'll just grab this Slack node from up here, paste that down here, and then just connect these guys up. Okay, so that hopefully is very clear. Switch is checking the sender of the email. If the sender equals build.approvals at client.com, we're going to send it down this way to get labeled, summarized, and then sent to Slack. So that's that. The next ones are easier because we actually don't have to do anything but label. So I'm just going to copy this. Get rid of this. I'm going to get rid of this. And I think I'm just going to copy this one more time down here just to show that we're pretty much doing the exact same thing. So first of all, I'm going to grab an arrow from here, drag it down to this Gmail node. This would be if it comes through as a VIP email. We would label it as VIP. And I think that's all we would do. Let's see. Yep, we would pretty much just label it. So this is even just like one of those you could set up as a routing rule in your Gmail itself. But if you're building out an inbox manager, might as well just take care of it here, right? And then these final ones down here will be the wildcard at client.com. And we'll just say we would be labeling this one as an internal email. Okay. So I think that is our wireframe already done. It's very clear. You can see we have 2 AI nodes being utilized in the green. We have our trigger over here, and the trigger kind of every time will set off these 2 paths, which will first check for contacts, and then it will also route the actual email, label it, summarize it potentially, and that's that. That's what we got. So we have our daily summary, and we have our inbox manager. And as you can see, those are pretty much deterministic workflows. And now what we've got is the big boy. So we have our personal assistant. We know that the trigger will be in Slack, the response will be in Slack. We will just start off with the email actions. So cool. We're gonna just bring this over here. We will call this one our personal assistant. I'm just gonna grab a trigger from over here. And this one's gonna look a lot different, I think. But anyways, let's get started. So the trigger here is going to be Slack. That's pretty clear. One thing to figure out is the bot, listening in the channel, or, does it have to be mentioned or added? Couple questions to figure out, but in general, it's gonna be a Slack trigger, which is pretty simple. Now, we've got a personal assistant, right? And we think that what we want to do is we're gonna have email actions, calendar actions, monday.com actions, and then access to contacts database. And then obviously we want a writing style integration. So to me, up front, pretty much each of these bullet points my head is coming through as a tool. And potentially this one, we don't need a separate workflow. We could just have one node, which would be, or one tool that would be Google Contacts, search for contacts. But with these tools, it seems like we're going to want an email agent, a calendar agent, and a Monday.com agent. So that's the architecture I'm thinking about doing right now. And we're just going to wireframe that out and see if that makes sense. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a bigger, solid, we'll call this just the main agent. Make this text a little bigger. So we have our main agent. The trigger gets put into here. So what we have going on here is we will have, actually, you know what? I want to make the text out here so I can just make it higher. And what I want to do is just visually show like what I'm thinking about, what actually goes in here. So we'll have our user message, which is coming in from Slack. We're going to make this smaller. So the user message is coming in from Slack. Hopefully it looks like that comes in right there. We'll also have like a system prompt, which will be maybe a little bit bigger. We'll make this a different color as well. System prompt, which will define the behavior of this agent, and it'll show the different tools that it has. Actually, maybe I'll just, here I go again with the colors. Yeah, maybe I'll just leave it like that. That's fine. So we have our system prompts, and then also we will have an aspect of memory. So I'm just gonna. Okay, so this is just to show, like, in my mind, the way I'm thinking of what the agent's actually going to have internally before it actually goes out and starts to use its tools. So we're not going to get too much into that, but hopefully you guys understand like what's going on here. The user message is what it responds to. The system prompt is how it acts and what tools it'll call. And the memory is like just looking at past interactions and keeping context for that. So with agents, I always like to make the tools circles. So we're going to grab a circle, and this is going to be our email agent. We'll just make these blue, and we'll hook this up to the main agent. And so there's a couple ways we could display what's going on within the email agent. We could make a separate workflow down here, email agent, show what's going on, but I'm just gonna like branch off the tools from this agent. So if I just explicitly grab these, put them right here pretty much, each of these is a tool, essentially. So I'm going to just throw these in a box. How can I make this? There we go. Okay. So these are behind this guy. We're just going to do this. And then these are going to be tools now, rather than, we previously had like one action sort of thing. But these are now the tools that belong to the email agent. So hopefully that's pretty clear to see. This would be a, sub workflow that the main agent would call upon. And, that's how that would work. So cool. There's our first sub workflow. Actually, we'll just copy this much because we know we need to do the same for a calendar agent. It's gonna have tools. We'll copy. Actually, I'll just do it again. Put our tools right here, and then we're just gonna go in here and grab our calendar actions. Put those right in there. Perfect. Okay. I don't know why those were coming through as different sizes, but it worked out perfectly. So I'll take it. We'll drag this in here. We've got a few more to go. So the Monday.com actions. Copy these in. That should work well. Throw that right there. Throw it behind those items. And then I'm just going to grab these as well. And this is going to be our Monday.com agent. Oh dear, that's going to bother me. Maybe we'll just make this circle a little bit wider. That bothers me even more, to be honest. Okay, you know what? No, never mind. We'll just deal with it. So we got the Monday.com agent. And then finally, we actually need a way for this main agent to have access to contacts. So that is going to be just one tool. So I will actually just throw this over here. It's not going to be a sub workflow. This is just a tool in itself, where we'll say Google Contacts. I'm just going to throw this here and say this is just one singular tool. So you can see that there, and it also has access to that. So this is kind of the architecture, right? We have these four main tools. Within those tools, you can see we have different ones as well. If we wanted to go out there and actually wireframe out what these other, sub agents would look like, we obviously could. That's not something that we're going to do in this video. But if that would help you feel more comfortable actually building this thing out, you definitely could. And maybe on your first one, you should. But anyways, it's pretty clear these are kind of like the sub workflow agents. This is just one tool in itself. And then the final aspect really that we see on this functionality, PRD, is the writing style. So use the client's custom writing style when drafting messages like in email and Slack, etc. So because the actual output, and I'm just going to use yellow because it's going back to the same place. we will just define this here as the output. What is the agent actually going to do besides its tool calls is down here. What I'm going to do is basically just show how we were thinking of getting that writing style. So it's obviously going to be in the system prompt is where we're doing that. So I'm trying to figure out just how to visually show that it would be from email actions and Slack actions. I think what I'm going to do is just grab something like out here and say, make this like this, and we'll just say writing style will be incorporated into the main agent system prompts. So kind of just throw that there, and we'll also just, there we go. Okay, so this is kind of what we're looking at, right? We have, we have 3 different flows, and they differ largely. So the daily summary, right? This is a very sequential, standard, linear AI workflow. Triggered at 5 a.m. We're going to do calendar. We're going to do monday.com. Once we have both of all those actions or tasks, we are going to feed that into an LLM to summarize those, and then we're going to feed that into Slack every weekday, 5 days a week, easy, same order. Inbox manager, it's also going to be very linear. It's going to go boom, 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 like whatever it needs to. And there's rule-based filters here. So does a contact exist? It's either yes or no. That doesn't have to use AI. There's a switch for the email sender. That doesn't have to use AI. We're only using AI to extract information from an email or summarize an email in this case. And this can easily be built upon. Like we could easily, if the client wanted to, we could duplicate this logic down here and also down here so that every single email coming through is getting an AI summary as well as a Slack message, but that's not what he wants so far. And then this also leaves it up for more like later logic. Like let's say none of the emails coming through are from one of these 4 email addresses, which they aren't actually. So we need to finish this up. What happens there? So what would happen in this flow is that it just wouldn't continue down the path and it wouldn't get labeled at all. And that's probably, since all we've talked about were these 3 paths, that's probably what he wants what he wants to happen. But the cool thing is you could then have like another one. So if it doesn't match any of this criteria, we could then send it down another branch to use AI to analyze what branch it should be going down. Not one of these 3, but any other branches or any other labels that he has in Gmail. Maybe he wants an auto draft written by AI. So that is what's going on down here. This one is a workflow, but it's not as deterministic because we don't know which path it's going to go down. But we do know that there's no need for AI to make decisions. Like there's just no need for that. That would be overkill. However, over here, this is definitely a use case where we do need AI to make decisions, to draft up certain things, and to also choose on which tools do I need to use based on the request coming in. So as you can see, we were able to get some questions written down that we'll want to go over. We have everything sort of listed out, and this builds confidence with our stakeholders that, okay, this guy does know how to build this thing. I can trust him to do this and send me updates, whatever it is. But you'll find that when you meet with a client, him or her will, not him or her, he or she will definitely provide feedback on what you have and answer any questions that you might have had while you were building out this thing. Because essentially this is you taking your first stab at it and understanding what this is going to look like without actually wasting your time in end. And that's when the questions would come up, and that's when you'd have to shoot them an email and ask that question. But if you're syncing over the wireframe live on a call, it's going to be a lot more seamless. So I'm gonna cut this one here. Feel free to leave any comments you may have, any questions, anything that I went over a little too quick. But hopefully this one was helpful. Definitely let me know if you got any feedback. And if you've been using any different tools for wireframing or sort of whiteboarding, let me know. I've been pretty loyal to Excalidraw since I found out about it. It's obviously very similar to something like Miro. There are conversations around having AI wireframe something for you based on a prompt. I think that there are some tools that can do that, but it's also like visually, how do you want to show this to your client or your stakeholder, or even just for yourself? And also it's the same thing when people ask me about like a natural language to AI agent builder, something I don't really want to touch, because if I'm building the system, I want to make sure I understand exactly how it's configured so that I can go in there and quickly make changes, quickly increase the functionality, add tools, whatever it is. And like I said, once again, if you're the one sort of putting together this instruction manual, it's going to be so much easier when you're the one building it. It's not always going to be the case. Sometimes like I would hand off a wireframe like this to a developer or something. It's still going to help them because they can see it all out and they know, it's just very clear. But ultimately, if you're doing it yourself, you're going to learn more. So anyways, half an hour of me rambling. Hopefully it was helpful. I'll see you guys in the next one. Thanks.